start streaming. Let me actually
Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better. But we're starting, okay?
Okay.
You look great, man.
Yeah,
Don't change anything now.
let me see
Good.
if there's audio. Hi guys, I see Mike in the live chat. Let me see if there's audio. I see Robert in the live chat. Yeah, okay, good. We have great audio. Okay, Ali, everything is ready to go.
Yeah, we are live, right? Aren't we?
Yes, we
Yeah.
are.
So we're cool. Damn, I gotta do something about my background.
I have so many questions
Okay,
and we're not
does
going to have
sound
enough time.
Huh?
I have so many questions and we're not going to have enough time.
That's the story of everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The most thing, especially with Tom Holland. When we had Tom Holland on, I was like trying to. There's so many things I wanted to ask him, and we
Right.
just could not get through. And everything
And-
he said was just so.
Yeah.
I was like riveted the entire time. Did you hear that episode, Sohail? Yeah.
I did. Yeah, it was fantastic. I felt like it was so. You were trying to pack in so much. I was like, this needed to be like a 3-part thing with him.
I know.
We were lucky to have him in even once, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can.
Well, we're lucky to have you as well. So maybe
Thank
we
you.
could have more. Can we have 3 episodes with you or more?
Hey, if you guys want it,
Okay.
we'll do it.
All right, Ali, we should start.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and with me is Armin Navabi. Armin's right here. I can see him. Armin, hi. How are you?
Good.
He hates it when I ask that question, but anyway, whatever. Like every time. I have to. He has to acknowledge. I can't just say it. But anyway, so today we actually have on somebody who's a very, very good friend of mine and of Armin's, and we've been following him for a very long time. But he was in the closet, and behind the scenes, he has been an ex-Muslim activist. He has mentored a lot of publicly known ex-Muslim YouTubers, podcasters, writers, and he is finally out. He came out with a really explosive 2.5-hour video, and his name is most of you know him as Reason on Faith on social media. But today he's coming here. It's Sohail Ahmad is on the show. Finally, hey Sohail, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Ali. I'm great. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, I feel like we're just kind of talking normally, and there's no audience because that's how we usually talk. So it's really cool.
Sure.
So Sohail was raised in the minority Islamic sect of Ahmadiyyat. So this is a community. The Ahmadi Muslims have been persecuted relentlessly by mainstream Muslims for a very long time, which continues on today. Today, Sohail has come out of the closet, but you actually left the faith, or at least started having doubts about it as much as 20 years ago, right? So, what took you so long to decide to actually come out?
Well, so I guess it's in a few parts. People who've had a chance to see even the first maybe 20, 30 minutes of my video will know that even after I had questions and I left, I did come back for a time, because I left in a time where, there's that cliche of like, you think you're the only one. It's like you and Salman Rushdie, and you haven't heard of anybody else who's left. It's, pre-internet forums. So you don't really, it's pre-Facebook. You don't have any awareness that other people leave. And so after a couple of years, you just feel socially isolated. And I think religious communities almost accept this byproduct and run with it because it serves them. And so people tend to come back, and I'm thinking, if nobody else has these kinds of issues, I mean, how come I seem to be the only one? Everybody else is kind of getting on with their lives. They get to be part of the community. They get married. They have families. Why is it only me that's thinking about these things? So I tried to compartmentalize, and I came back for a few years. I'd stay away from things Dawa related.
But when you came back, you mean you came back as a believer or as just part of the community?
I came back as part of the community because I longed for community. But, after a while, you see other people praying, they're doing things, they're coming out to, Jummah prayer, and they're just fitting in. And it's hard to keep that barrier in your mind. So what I thought is, maybe my questions, my doubts, the things I disagree with, maybe there's just a whole other level of understanding, and I don't have. I'll just put my doubts aside, and I'll just sort of live my life in the community. I will, I'll go through the motions. I'll pray. I'll fast as best as I can, and I'm going to purposely stay away from the deep theological stuff, which is going to like trigger me and take me out of the bubble, because I just want to turn my brain off. I want to take the blue pill. I just want to fit in. And so when, there'd be some people I remember being like, hey, why don't you join us? We're going to have this dawah stall. And Ahmadis tend to use the Urdu term tabligh more for the preaching. And they were like, we've got this tabligh stall. You'd be really good. You speak well. And I'd be like, no. Give me, charity work or whatever. I'll get involved that way. So I ran blood drives. And it was my way of sort of participating, being a part of it. But I did try to, go through the motions, compartmentalize my doubts, and think, maybe it's above my pay grade, and I will just fit in. I'll just go through the motions, and maybe kind of like Blaise Pascal, who says, with Pascal's wager, like, even if you don't believe, just keep doing it till you numb your mind. And, through enough rote repetition, you can almost trick yourself into believing the lie.
So what you're doing is like, you're kind of coming back into it, and you're getting involved in the community from a humanistic sort of perspective, where you're doing blood drives and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But so first of all, this is something I actually meant to say in the introduction, but I'll say it right now. The video that you made, okay, is one of the best summaries of the ex-Muslim experience, or the increasing number of people who are leaving Islam. It's actually one of the best, most comprehensive videos or any sort of coming out message that I've seen. And it applies not only to Ahmadis, but it goes into the Quran. It actually talks about mainstream Islam, because you didn't just leave Ahmadiyyat, you left Islam altogether. So you talked about a lot of Islamic arguments in general, and you talked about why Islam is something that you don't believe in anymore, and why you don't think that people should believe in it anymore. So I wanted to bring that out there. So if anybody's listening out there, and if you're just a Muslim with doubts, watch the video, because it's not the Ahmadiyya or minority sect. That's not the point here. This is actually quite very, very mainstream. And I guess the second question I wanted to say, you said you were triggered. You said that if you came back and you got into the deep theological questions, you'd feel triggered. What would trigger you? Why would you feel triggered if you got too deep into it?
So, for example, I think it's our human nature to be able to, reconcile what we believe, how we act, how we identify with reality, especially the people who, they have a tendency to want to live an examined life. And so there'd be times where I'd be like, okay, let me just pray and, see if I get a sign from Allah, or I just, feel good and go through the motions. But oftentimes I'd be in sajda, which is the sort of, when you're on the ground, you're in the most sort of submissive position, and you're pouring your heart out. But then I'd remember these theological questions, and I'd be like, okay, well, in certain inequality in the Quran between men and women, I'm like, why is that? Why would God do that? And so I'd just be angry in the prayer. So sometimes I would just trigger myself, because as I'm trying to get closer, there'd be an internal sort of defense mechanism saying, what the hell? We're not going to disengage the intellect. We can't. You have to deal with this. So I'd sort of be oscillating between emotion and intellect, and wanting to fit in, but not being able to deny these things. But if I started, for example, if I would gone with some of the wonderful people that I knew in the community who were running a dawah stall, and maybe there's some Christians being like, oh, what's this about? And talking about it, very early into a conversation, I would have to start defending things or getting into topics that, inherently I'd be trying to sell something I don't really fully buy. Or,
right.
In some areas I don't buy at all. And I think belief and fitting in, there's so many prongs to it. But if I start touching the preaching prong or the truth claims prong, I'm going to unravel this delicate balance I've tried to create for myself of just focusing on community and sort of setting the truth claims out of the picture so I don't get triggered.
So it seems that you were more motivated, like your leaving the faith seems to have been more motivated by a pursuit of truth and what's real, rather than a pursuit of I've been treated very unjustly. I've been oppressed, and I want to liberate myself. Because it's in your video. One of the things, I mean, the first thing you say in the video, you say to my Muslim brothers and sisters, or so I'm paraphrasing, you say, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. So, and throughout your video, you have this theme of, being very compassionate towards Muslims and being very compassionate towards Ahmadi Muslims. You also have a section in the video where you have a message for your Ahmadi Muslim friends and family, right? Where you say that this is not about you, and you make a very clear distinction that criticizing the ideology of Islam or the belief system does not mean that you are attacking the community. You're still very much a part of the community, and you're very much a part of an Ahmadi Muslim family.
Right.
But you have problems with the beliefs and the ideas themselves. So it does seem that you were really, this was more of an intellectual journey for you as a way to reconcile what you think is true rather than I mean, they're not, it's obviously there's parts to it that are emotional, but it wasn't predominantly emotional and came out of oppression. Is that true? Because a lot of people say, well, ex-Muslims, they're just angry at God because they had some problems with it and then they came out, but it wasn't like that for you. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure, but before, I think Armin wanted to jump in with a question, and I can blend the two.
I think we missed out an entire important thing right at the beginning because a lot of people are just. I think a lot of our audience don't know what we're talking about when we say Ahmadi Muslim, and I think we should have had a quick 101 on what this is all about before we even jumped into any of this.
Let's do that next. I think that I mean we mentioned that there are a persecuted sect, but we'll get into the theology of it.
No, I didn't. That's not what I mean. What I mean is just to understand that a lot of people, most Muslims don't consider consider this community to be even Muslim.
Correct.
Right. So I just wanted to touch on it's not just just like a Shia Sunni. Now this is another sect. This is one of those sects in Islam where the people in it are if one thing unites most Muslims is their hatred for these other small groups like Baha'is and Ahmadis. They consider it innovation. They consider it worse than atheists. They consider them worse than the Jews, worse than non-believers, because they're not only... It's worse than not believing in Islam, they're changing Islam. So just wanted to touch on that, but we go into theology.
Yeah, we'll get into that. I think maybe we'll just close the sort of personal story arc that you wanted to, Ali, and then we'll be clear for the theology. So for me, it wasn't an emotional thing actually at all. I came at it, looking at the religion in my teens and finding, when you read stuff from your own religious community, it's very curated. It looks really good. It sounds good. It's very compelling. You're a young teenager. You're very idealistic. And, you associate your identity with the belief and you're like, wow, okay, we're pretty progressive compared to other Muslims. Hey, Jesus Christ didn't pull a Peter Pan off the cross. He actually got saved. It wasn't a resurrection. It was a resuscitation. And then he just migrated east because he was persecuted. Oh, this makes so much more sense. And I really love that Jesus in India narrative, which we'll get into in the theology part if there's time. So there was a lot of things like that I really liked about the religion. And I think, all too often when we're in circles that are critical of religion, we sometimes sidestep or don't, place a bookmark often enough that there are things compelling about religion. The things that are not compelling, we tend to focus on. But the things that are compelling, we tend to forget to mention or we ignore. But that is part of the story. And so some of those things, a more compelling theological narrative compared to sort of the rest of Islam, as I saw it as a teen, I was like, hey, I want to help spread this. You got that idealism. Hey, if everybody could be under this one banner, like a zealous Christian youth might be like, hey, if I could bring everybody to Christ, and you think one of those Coca-Cola commercials, give the world a hug or whatever. So you have that sort of zealotry. And so I was passionate about it. And then I thought to myself, you know what, in trying to do, I would do dawah in high school. I would take excerpts from Ahmadi books and there wasn't websites at this point. So I'm typing them up and then I'll print them out on my dot matrix printer and hand them out in the library to my friends to start discussing religion. Like, I was that passionate about it. And I recognized that there was a few topics that Islam just gets pummeled over, in the West at least. Nobody seems to care about this stuff in the East. But it just gets pummeled over. So I thought, you know what? It's been a few years. Let me go study some of these difficult areas, because I know that one of the skills I had was I was a decent communicator. So if I could understand this stuff, then I could sell it to anybody. I could convince them. So I looked into the theology, and it started troubling me. And that was the genesis of my questioning. It wasn't an emotional thing. It's not because I wanted to sin. I mean, to this day, I haven't even touched a drop of alcohol. So there's a lot of values I take from Islam that have kind of informed me, and some of the things that I've been born with that I'm just comfortable with and I've stayed with. It was all about the theology.
Yeah,
like
it's
what?
about
That's it.
What's true.
What's true is more important to me than what's comfortable.
But
Yeah.
This sect of Islam, a lot of people consider it to be a lot more peaceful, right?
Right.
A lot more accepting, a lot more less violent, less aggressive. But why is that? So why would you not? Why was that not good enough for you? Like, why a lot of people say, like, who cares what the truth is? As long as there's a religion ideology that is not harming people, in fact, that might be a solution to the more violent, more aggressive branches of Islam. Why is this obsession over the truth?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. Let me try to touch on the first one. Even devout Ahmadi Muslims will say, no, truth matters. I agree with you. If it's not true, then you shouldn't believe it. Now, most of them will not concede that we can have different opinions and that I can sincerely hold this belief. Most of the social media attacks I'm getting is like, oh, well, you should just be objective. And I'm like, okay, so if I don't agree with you, I'm not objective. But in isolation, these same people will say, yes, truth matters, in theory. For me, I think, yes, absolutely, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has been stellar at promoting a non-violent ethos. There's never been a terrorist attack with any Ahmadi, at the helm, sort of running it, because it's so, and I can explain why that is. But, what a lot of people miss about Islam, and I think especially sort of right-wing who pick up on the ex-Muslim discourse, is that it's not all about terrorism. That's like such a small part of the narrative. And I think, Armin, you've mentioned this in the past.
Yeah, many times, yeah. We both agree on this.
How our lives are impacted. Terrorism is not even an issue for me growing up or questioning. It's not even on the radar. So for people who think like that's the issue, it's not. The way we live our lives, whether it's a woman being forced to wear hijab or the sort of limited arranged marriage choices, sort of the strict segregation, not being able to sort of, just live authentically, a lot of little day-to-day things. It's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
And if you stray from it, if you deviate from it, you get excommunicated. That's all and disowned, and that is the issue.
What I say that is Islam fucks with your life in a lot more ways than terrorism. That's what I used to say. Yeah, but even if all of those ways that Islam was not there to fuck with your life, but why is it that just the truth matters more than the consequences to you? You know what I mean? Just that principle. Why is that there?
I think I can actually credit my Islamic upbringing for emphasizing that. Like when I was a young kid in Sunday school, I'd hear stories about the early Muslims in the Meccan period. They were tortured or, persecuted and told to like give up their belief. But they would die. They'd suffer the torture because what was true should not be denied. And so, I actually took that lesson from Islam and ran with it. And I think I think it's a good lesson. It's important. And I think this is such a broader philosophical question. At one level, it seems obvious, and at another level, it could be a 5-hour conversation.
Right.
But really briefly, I think that when you accept truth as a foundation, you layer truth upon truth, you're less likely to get misguided, to run into problems. It's kind of like, why is lying wrong? You need another lie to catch it up, and then it feels bad inside, and it creates a mess. It just gets messy. So I think we can live better lives by seeing things as they are.
So what would you say?
It's actually, can I say one thing? Just one thing. Like, I have to point this out. What you said about how Islam actually led you to the pursuit of truth, I had a very similar experience. So I was my cousin who went to Qom to become an alim and everything like that. So I was roommates with him for about 2 or 3 years, and we used to have these sort of theological discussions on Shiaism and Islam all the time. And he's like, the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of logic, truth. And I did that, and eventually I discovered Bertrand Russell, and so in a way, Islam led me to atheism. It's really weird.
So what would you say to people that say, look, people are not going to leave their Islam, and it seems like Ahmadi Islam is a better version of Islam, and by going against Ahmadi Islam, you might be giving up our only option to make these Muslims a little bit more tolerant?
Yeah, so again, that could be a really big conversation, and it can kind of lead into the typical, reform versus apostasy stuff. So I'll be really brief there. But interestingly, some Ahmadi apologists, I've come on Twitter. They're like, we're such a peaceful community. Why do you have to keep attacking us and things like that? And I'm just pointing out, weird references from their books of, bizarre theology, because that really points to, like, is this even true or not? And so even some of their own apologists take that perspective, not all of them, but some of them take that approach of, like, why don't you just focus on the Muslims who are violent and doing terrorist acts and things like that? Yeah. And I look at it as, there are many problems in this world, but a lot of them are solved by pursuing what's true. And I don't want to give, there's so many other problems that Ahmadiyya Islam creates in people's lives. I'm not going to give them a free pass from criticism.
Right.
And I don't think, yes, there are some, Orthodox Muslims who have converted to Ahmadiyya Islam because they're like, it just sort of fits in with your sort of more innate humanity of being a little bit more compassionate. And, if that works for them, great. It's a step in the right direction.
The biggest thing that I have heard for why a lot of mainstream Muslims convert to Ahmadiyya Islam is that they have an issue with the violent verses in the Quran, and Ahmadiyya apologetics has a sort of an institutionalized way of dealing with it and getting rid of it. So it makes them feel, because they have this whole like, why is all this violent stuff in here in the book? And then Ahmadiyya's come and go, okay, this is how we explain it. We've got all these sort of philosophical, ideas about why Islam is non-violent, and they can really believe this religion of peace stuff, and also keep the infallibility of Scripture intact. So I think that is a very compelling thing for a lot of.
What I could respond to, what I suggest people respond to them is the same way. If they want to compare themselves with other Muslims, then we could compare them being persecuted in Pakistan and other places to what we're doing. We're like, why are you complaining about us just criticizing you when there's actual people that want to kill you, right? Like, you're going after your critics, which are doing nothing other than pointing out the flaws in your logic, where there are people out there that are actually trying to hunt you down and imprison you, and you're upset with us with our just words, right? So that could be a comeback. I don't know.
So in their defense, I think what they would say is, by that criticism going to them, it makes it harder for people who are looking for a softer path to accept it. But I'm on the page with you, Armin, about and I'm sure you, Ali, as well, that, if you just put the truth in front of people and let them decide, and it's complete apostasy, great. That's just better. We don't need to take baby steps. If the people want to take baby steps, that's for them. But I want to put the information out there for people to, take the leap if they're ready.
Yeah, even if you want them to take baby steps, by the way, if you want to do that, the best way to get people to take baby steps is to put the truth out there. Because usually what happens is, and I've talked about this here before, nobody prospectively decided to do reform. I mean, these guys, the Enlightenment thinkers, like, Voltaire and Rousseau and these guys, they just came out and they just said what they did, and they just said, we reject all of this. And then the people took that, and then they now had two different poles that they could be between, and most of them chose an in-between, watered-down, hippie form of Jesus and Christianity that they accepted for. So this whole reform thing was actually a result of people putting all of the truth out there and going full, okay, I completely reject this, rather than starting off in the middle ground. So if you want them to take baby steps, go all the way.
So how did you? Yeah, actually, that's a very good point, Ali. How did your community and family react to the video?
So, I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks from the video, and I think because it's so long, it's people taking their time, kind of going through it. So I think we haven't gotten the full sort of reaction to the video per se. But and some people who follow me on Twitter will know, there's been a few tweets a few days ago where there are people who I expected people to talk about it and share it. And in fact, I wanted that, because it'd be people like, oh my God, this guy left, and it'd be shared around in their family groups. And that's fine. That's I wanted to start a dialogue and discourse. What I didn't expect, it's almost because I expected more of people, was people kind of, through intermediaries kind of talking to my family and sort of expressing like, well, he left, he should just leave. Why does he have to talk about it? And, that kind of a sentiment. And it's so ironic because I think most Ahmadi Muslims, the community, most people actually don't know that much about their theology.
Well, most religious people in general, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, progressive sort of PR that goes on, and everybody sort of drinks that Kool-Aid, but they don't recognize that, just over 100 years ago, the founder of the movement, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, he had a lot of sort of really biting critique of Christianity, and he would dig in. And so one of the things I've still got to do is have a dialogue with family and extended family and sort of show this. And I didn't really include that in my video. It was like, it would be 3 hours long. And those are things I want to do as a follow-up. But a lot of them don't recognize that the way I'm critiquing is actually gentler than the way their own quote-unquote promised Messiah had critiqued other religions. And the thing is, I don't blame him for that. He has every right to have done that. But for a missionary community that goes on the offense theologically, to then have most of its people say, wait a minute, whoa, you can't do that. Why are you talking about this? How disrespectful and so forth.
You're following the example of the leader.
Yeah, and I think this reminds me of even what you would say often, Ali, which was so beautiful about how, Prophet Muhammad in 7th century Arabia, he is the original blasphemer. To blaspheme is sunnah. And even for me, I'm one of those people who says everybody has a right to blaspheme. Absolutely. But I'm one of those people that just because I have a right, I won't often do it. It will be very calculated. There'll be context. It'll serve a purpose. Now, there'll be other people who say, look, it doesn't have to serve a purpose. I just want to blaspheme. They have that right. I will never take that away from them. My own style is, it's got to have a purpose, and it's got to be kind of measured to what you're doing. And I know people will disagree with me, but that's how I've been approaching things. And for a lot of Ahmadis who are complaining, and I think, frankly, a lot of people who haven't even seen my video or even 20 minutes of it, just shocked that somebody's speaking up because they're so used to having a privileged position. And that reminds me of that saying somebody has about when you're so used to having privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Right. Yeah, and it's also about, it's all about how broad your definition of blasphemy is, because I know you're saying that your approach is not to blaspheme, and of course, none of us are at the level of of blasphemy that the Prophet Muhammad was. So
Yeah.
Muhammad actually, he went out and he destroyed the gods of the Quraysh. He was
Yeah.
chased out of Mecca. All of that. He was like a god compared to us when it comes
Yeah.
to blasphemy. We're just kind of like drawing cartoons and doing podcasts and writing books. But
And
what I was saying was that your entire video to a lot of people is blasphemy.
Yeah.
So even though you say that you use a different approach, I mean, it was Daniel Dennett who said that there is no polite and kind way to point out to somebody that their entire life has been an illusion. And if you simply, like Malala Yousafzai got shot in the head just because she said girls should go to school, and that was considered blasphemous to some people. So, when you're dealing with faith and irrationality, the bar for what is blasphemy or not just oscillates at
Yeah.
a scale that
And at the level of
none
my
of us think
video,
at.
I completely stand by it. I don't think, if other people think that's blasphemy at that level, then I think they're just being really sensitive and they don't know their own history of Muhammad, of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad either.
By the way,
But
I have
they
so many
don't.
questions,
That's
and
the
by this rate, we're not going to even cover 25.
Armin, you got to jump in. You got to be more aggressive.
Well,
do it.
okay. Well, then no, I can't, because I see so many comments telling me that I'm interrupting you, and then when I don't, you tell me that I need to interrupt
I'm
you.
giving. Hey, listen.
No,
forget about-
actually, I think this has
forget
been
about
going
what
at a good
everybody else
pace.
thinks.
Right.
And then
No.
when we switch over to Armin's questions,
No,
I think it'll work.
By the way,
No,
to
no,
all
let
the
him jump
people
in.
that tell me that I interrupt Ali so much, Ali wants me to interrupt him, or else if he wouldn't, wouldn't get a single question.
I am fine with you interrupting me,
Right,
and I
okay.
will fight back, and I will try to find space to
All right,
crowd
good.
questions with the guest,
So-
like I am doing right now. But all I want,
Oh,
just
now
don't
you-
interrupt
okay.
the guest.
Yeah, of course. All right, so with regards to, here's the thing, the Baha'i, can I get to the theology now a little bit?
sure, yeah.
Is that a good, okay, so because a lot of people find this confusing because Baha'i...
Armin, I'm not going to interrupt you again. No more interruptions.
Shut up.
Should I actually give a 30-second overview to just kind of frame what
No.
Ahmadi
But
is?
Armin, finish your question. Let's have Armin finish. I was just messing with him. But
No,
go on.
let's get the 30-second reference, because I want to hear before I ask the question. Go on.
Okay, so the Ahmadiyya sect was founded in 1889 by a person named Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in the
Right.
Indian subcontinent. And he basically said, after a few years, that Jesus had died, a natural death, which most Muslims thought, Jesus is still alive and he's returning. And so this person said, look, the Jesus that's supposed to return, all those prophecies are very symbolic. I'm that person in terms of a sort of a metaphorical second coming. And he founded a community, and then there was caliphs who followed. And right now, the Ahmadi community has the fifth caliph of their, what they refer to as the promised Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And he's based in London right now. And so, estimates put this community at somewhere between 10 and 20 million, although there was a huge scandal about them in the early 2000s claiming 200 million adherents, and that's a whole other topic, which we should touch on later.
Yeah.
But so he basically recognized that Islam
Right.
in the Indian subcontinent was coming under attack from a lot of Christianity. So he tried to explain Islamic apologetics in a way that was more palatable. And I think he was successful, and it was a lot more sophisticated. He's not the first one to do it, but he's one of the first, I think, that packaged it up very neatly.
Right, he's not actually another. This is what I was gonna get at. Everything you say about Ahmadis seems so much like the Baha'is, right? The main difference between, I think that.
Well, there's way bigger differences.
I know. Well, I didn't even say the differences, but I'm just saying there's a lot of similarities, right? I'm not saying they're this. Obviously, they're very, very different, but there's so many similarities. It's kind of, to me, it seems. I don't know why my microphone auto-adjusts itself. Somebody have to teach me how to stop that. But it's, to me, Ahmadis are like the Baha'is of the Indian subcontinent, right? The main difference is that the Baha'is don't consider themselves Muslim, and the Ahmadis do, right?
Right.
But both of them consider the Quran to be legitimate, right, and from God.
Yeah.
Both of them, their founders. So the Ahmadis was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and the Baha'is was Mirza Hussein Ali. It doesn't help that they have both Mirza in their confuses. The Ahmadis came out of Sunni Sufi mix, right?
Yeah.
The Baha'is came out of Shia Sufi mix, right? The main problem that the Muslim community has against both of them is both of them were foreign backed, right? Baha'is mostly by Ahmadis mostly by the Great Britain.
Well, that's a sort of a slander. I wouldn't take that as a given.
I
They were
mean,
sympathetic, and we can get into that. But to say that Ahmadis were funded by the British, I think that's
That's
really simplistic.
but well, I mean, we are doing a simplistic summary right now. I'm just saying they
were sympathetic to the values the British government brought in of secularism.
No, the British government was using many different sects to, I mean,
in my
in
study,
Iran,
that's never. But in India, with the Ahmadis, I've never seen any of that substantiated.
Okay, I mean, it's not very. It's very British-like to do this, by the way. So I've seen some other.
It may be, but I can't vouch for that being the narrative.
Both of them
happened.
started in the late 1800s, right? Baha'is and Shia, Baha'is and Ahmadis, right?
Right.
And both of them are heavily, oppressed and persecuted. Baha'is mostly in Iran, Ahmadis mostly in Pakistan.
Correct.
Right. So very very similar. But again, Baha'is don't act. What is it about the seal of the prophet? Right? Do Ahmadis think Muhammad was the last prophet?
So it's a bit of a nuance there, and give me 30 seconds on this one.
Okay.
Ahmadis say that Muhammad was the last law-bearing prophet. So they have the same kalma as other Muslims. They have the same 5 pillars as other Sunnis, 6 articles of faith, same Quran. They believe there's no abrogation. So they're actually closer to Sunni Islam than Shias are to Sunni Islam. So that's why when people sort of look at them as like fringe, like Baha'i, in some ways it doesn't do justice to how similar they are.
Are you sure? Because
yes,
when you say, here I put my Sunni hat on, and I will say like, no, actually Shias are closer to it. As a Sunni, I might say, no, that's not right. Shias are actually a little bit closer to us because one of the most important things in Islam is the fact that Muhammad was the last prophet.
So let me
Shias at least accept that, and you guys don't.
In the sense that I was talking is, if you spend a day just a fly on the wall looking at an Ahmadi live their life, or let's say over the course of a week, how they pray, how they fast, the du'as they give, or whatever, they're going to be almost indistinguishable from a Sunni family when you're a fly on the wall looking at them, than a Shia family if you're a fly on the wall observing them for a week.
Right.
So in the day-to-day experience, it's going to look almost indistinguishable. Right. As far as the theology is concerned, Ahmadis will say, look, we're not changing anything. We're saying, and I'm putting my Ahmadi hat on, that Muhammad was the last law-bearing prophet, and Ahmadis will say that, but prophethood is allowed to continue because, and they'll say, hey, you Sunnis and you Shias, you actually believe this and you don't even realize, because when you believe Jesus is going to come back, it's not like God's going to strip him of his prophethood. He is technically coming chronologically after, even though he also came chronologically before. And then this is where you just get into semantic hair splitting.
No, I'm going to put my Sunni hat on as well. Again, no, but he is still the same prophet. Jesus is the same prophet as before. It's not a new fucking prophet.
It's not about new. Right. It's about chronology, and if he's coming after.
According to who? According to Ahmadis, no, there's nowhere that is.
If you're looking at Khatam or Khatam, whichever qiraat you want to use, even last, it's about chronology.
So when Jesus comes back,
and Muhammad is the last newest prophet, doesn't say, it's just last.
Okay,
even if you take that literally.
You don't know when Sunnis and Shias say Jesus is going to come back. Maybe he's not going to come back he's not going to have any revelations while he's here. So maybe he's not.
It doesn't matter. He's still prophet Jesus. In the Quran, it refers to him as a prophet. If the Quran is there until doomsday, then prophethood he can't be stripped away from him.
I think Sunnis and Shias have a stronger argument here. This is Khatamatun Nabi. It doesn't say Khatamatun Nabi with a book.
It's but it is. So wait, the Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was the also claimed to be the metaphorical reincarnation of Jesus, right?
Yes. Yeah.
He did. So
Both of them.
I
Actually,
actually
both. This is
And
another
he claimed to be
similarity.
Mahdi and Messiah,
and
and
the Median Messiah.
he would use something from the Sunnah. I think it's in Ibn Majah. There's a saying, "La Mahdi illa Isa." Basically, there's no Mahdi but Isa. So they'll refer to that saying it's 2 in 1.
By the way,
No,
Ali,
but for
Ali,
PR purposes, sorry, one thing for PR purpose, because I'm trying to get into this discussion that you guys are having. For PR purposes, did he not at least try to make the claim that, hey, I'm not saying I'm the last prophet, I'm just the reincarnation of a previous prophet?
So there's a little bit of confusion because in the early part of his ministry, when he was more of like, a wise, saintly figure that a lot of people revered as like, hey, he's a great defender of Islam and so forth. He would even say that if anybody claimed to be a prophet, they're out of the fold of Islam. I'm not a prophet. And what would happen is over time, he sort of was less vocal about denouncing sort of another prophet coming. And then eventually he said, yeah, I am a prophet. And he wrote a book called The Will, and he spells that out. Now, the really important thing there is the apologetics, the main branch of Ahmadiyya uses, because there's actually a split in the community, but there's pretty much one main branch and everything else is really tiny. They would say, look, he was so humble that he said, I'm not a prophet. He grew up in an environment of those typical Islamic apologetics and understandings that said there's no more prophets. So that's why he rejected it. But that over time, God gave him dreams and revelations. And so he slowly realized that God was saying, no, you are a prophet. So that's why this gets a little bit of confusion in his writings. I mean, that's how the apologetic goes. And there is a chronology that can be used to make that argument.
So if I ask a random Ahmadi, do you think Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was Jesus himself? Would they say yes?
No, they'd say define himself. They'll just say he was a metaphorical second coming. Not
of Jesus.
Of Jesus, yeah.
This is another similarity between Baha'is and Ahmad, because the founder of Baha'i faith, Mirza Hussein Ali, was also supposed to be Jesus.
Right. They leverage the same sort of end time messianic prophecies and return and things like that.
Right.
That's really interesting. So I actually didn't know about this. I mean, I'm sure that there are many significant differences between the two, but these commonalities, it seems like they just came in different areas. One was in Persia and the other in the Sudan.
Yeah, but the biggest thing is the Baha'is don't self-identify as Muslims. They distance themselves, right?
Well, that is
Ahmadis are saying, look, we are the true Islam. And I guess the other point there is
they're
that
Muslim, though.
Yeah,
Baha'is don't call themselves Muslim, but if you believe in the Quran as a Quran and Muhammad and all that, technically you're Muslim.
Well, I guess depending on which definition, sure.
Right.
Ahmadis will say, though, that what had happened was that the Islam that they represent is the original Islam of Muhammad, but that over time it had gotten corrupted. A lot of self-serving sheikhs and leaders had sort of destroyed the face of Islam, introduced all kinds of novelties that were never there, and that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad came to actually correct and revive, not reform or sugarcoat, but from their perspective, bring back what was originally Islam and had gotten lost.
That's what every reformer says.
Right?
No.
So they don't see themselves as reformers. They see themselves, at most, as revivers of what was already there.
Right. So this is the difference. This is the difference between modern reformists and historical reformists. And throughout history, the so-called reformists of Islam, which, by the way, reforming Islam has been tried many times, right? But the main difference is that none of the reformists throughout history considered themselves reformists. Outsiders considered them reformists. They considered themselves revival. They saw like, no, this is what Muhammad intended. The modern reform movement in the Islam is people that are actually calling themselves reformists, which makes their method even less practical than traditional reformists, is because Muslims are like, yeah, Islam doesn't need reform. Like, if you even want to try to reform Islam, you have to act like you're not reforming Islam. You're just trying to bring it back to what it was. Right?
You have to create this sort of theological and historical plausible backstory all the way back to Muhammad to sort of justify the way you do.
You cannot be like, this needs changing, because then Muslims are like, wait, God's words needs changing? Like, no. You have to come.
That's why, as much as I love the Muslim reform movement's declaration, because it's very clear, and And a lot of people want to just sort of say, yeah, I believe in those values. But without the sort of theological backwork to take it all the way back to the 7th century, it's difficult for people to sort of bite.
Right. By the way, another difference between Baha'is and Ahmadis is that Ahmadis have hijab, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ahmadi women are encouraged to do the hijab, yeah.
Baha'is actually, they have a ruling against the hijab, which is weird. Right, but going back to what Ali was saying is that why like these similarities is very interesting. But the thing is that we know about Ahmadis and Baha'is a lot because they are they're on the news, they're persecuted, and it's very interesting. But throughout history, this was a common tactic. Hey, I'm the Mahdi. Hey, I'm the second coming of Jesus. Like these ideas were used over and over again many times. But these are the most famous.
Well, yeah, I mean, 1979, the siege of the Mecca mosque was done by a guy who claimed to be the Mahdi. Right. The Khomeini himself claimed to be the Mahdi.
Ismaili, the founder of the Ismailis, and even the Abbasites touched on that.
When I did my psychiatry rotations, and I used to work in the psychiatric hospitals, there were in Pakistan, in Karachi, there were at least 2 or 3 Imam Mahdis and all. I'm not kidding. This is not a joke. I am serious. There were several, because delusions of grandeur and people who are manic and a bipolar disorder, or so a lot of these people, they tend to have these delusions, and that's a very common delusion there.
So the founder of the Safavid Empire did that as well. But the interesting thing about Mirza Ghulam, so it's either you're the second coming of Jesus or you're the Mahdi. But what's interesting about Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is that he used both. Like, I'm both of those things.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and he used a hadith and sort of try to reconcile the two. And he said, look, God doesn't need to send 2 people, and so he could kind of rationalize it and make a case for it that was for a lot of people compelling. Yeah, because he's probably one of the more successful. And Ahmadi apologists would say, look, he wasn't killed, he wasn't beheaded like Joseph Smith was killed. So they'll look at that and say, look, God didn't curse him. He has a successful movement. It's all over the world. I mean, mostly it's emigration, for why Ahmadis are in so many countries. And you'll see them very shy away now from saying how many people. They won't say we're so many million strong. They'll say we're in 212 or whatever countries. Right. But most of those are just immigrants from Pakistan who got persecuted.
So there are 2 sects within the subsects within the Ahmadiyya faith. So this is kind of interesting because we've had this throughout. We've got the Shia and Sunni that kind of broke up because they had an issue with successorship. There was within the Shias, you've had the Ithnashri Shias, the Twelvers, and the Sixers, the Ismailis, and the Ismailis have also split later on into the Nizaris and the Bohras and everything. So in the same way, in the Ahmadiyya community, you have had a split based on leadership. So you have the Lahore group, and you have the, I don't know what the other one's called.
The main branch is called the Qadian branch. Usually we don't use the, like Qadiani is kind of a pejorative, but when you have to distinguish it from the Lahore branch, then it's not like the Qadian branch versus the Lahore branch.
The Lahore, by the way, for those people laughing at the word, it's a city in Pakistan. I know there's going to be loads of people, and I'm used to this because I was born in that city. That's a city I was born in. But anyway, so can you explain that difference?
Yeah, okay. So really briefly, what had happened is when Mirza Ghulam Ahmad had died, there was a Khalifa chosen after him who ruled he oversaw the community for 6 years, and everybody was unified under him. And then when it was time for the next Khalifa, basically Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's son, who was only 24, 25 at the time, was nominated, and he was very powerful. And the thing is, it's in human nature, and I think especially in areas where there's like sort of less educated people, there's that tribal mentality of like, you're the son of the founder, you should be next. Plus there's prophecies made about, this promised son. And so he was sort of in a pitched battle, both in terms of views and theology, but also leadership, where Mirza Ghulam Ahmad had also set up something called the Anjuman, which is basically sort of like a committee of really scholarly people. And those people were around, and it was kind of like a, Congress and the president. There was sort of like the Anjuman and the Khalifa. And the Khalifa still had more power, but it was sort of like, a contemplative body. If they're on the same page, it works. So But what had happened is a lot of people in that committee, in that consultative body, they didn't like Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's son, and they thought he was too young, not ready, and they disagreed on views. A lot of them was still not clear on was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad a prophet or not. So the Lahori said, no, he wasn't. It was just a metaphorical terminology, but it's not real prophethood. And you get into all this theological hair splitting. And the main branch, the promised son, Mirza Bashir bin Mahmud Ahmad, son of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, he said, no, he's actually a prophet. He just doesn't have a new law. And so there'd be a lot of sort of pitched battles there. And then ultimately the community split. And most people went with the founder's son because it just has that sort of, monarchy, royal, it's just that popular fast move. Yeah, that's always going to win. It's almost a very Shia thing to do. Yeah. But the thing is, when you look at some of the early writings of the Ahmadiyya movement and their periodicals and scholarly books and essays, most of the most intellectual stuff they read, which I think is really impressive, was actually written by people in the Lahore branch. There was a lot of really smart people there, and that intellectual legacy got lost.
So I have a question. Is it true that Ahmadis believe in Krishna and Buddha?
Yeah, so Ahmadis will basically say a lot of religions beyond what was mentioned in the Quran are from God, but they seem so unrecognizable because they were changed at the hands of man. So Krishna was really a prophet. Buddha was a prophet. They'll even say that Socrates was a prophet. And it's just these people are just not mentioned in the Quran, but there are sort of, religious legacy.
Right.
And
Baha'i say the same thing as well. But this is something that I think Sunnis and Shias won't say. They think that Krishna and Buddha were either made up or demons or something like satanic, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a better proselytizing sort of approach to say, hey, you guys were just corrupted, but you got some original ideas from people who were really sent by God. Let us show you the real thing. It's a bit more of an opener than, hey, that whole thing is BS.
So another similarity again between Baha'is and Ahmadis, and this is something that actually gets their advocating their religion a lot harder, is that their strong presence and good relationship with Israel. Is that especially in Haifa, in the city of Haifa in Israel?
Yeah, and so that's a mixed story. And one bookmark I'll just place here right now is I know you're doing a lot of comparisons between Baha'is and Ahmadis, and I think that doesn't necessarily tell the story of why Ahmadis are relevant today. Right. I think that similarity.
Well, the reason why for me, okay, so I grew up in Iran, right?
Yeah, I can see it
to me, Baha'is were the main weird sect coming.
It was your version of Ahmadiyyat in a sense.
Yeah, it was my version of Ahmadiyyat, and then when I learned more about Ahmadiyyat, like, oh, what's this? Are you sure you're not talking about Baha'is? And the more I learned about Ahmadis, that was my point of reference. And there are you have to admit, there are a lot of similarities here. Sure. And I know as somebody that grew up as an Ahmadi, you know more of the differences than, the similarities doesn't seem that big of a deal. But from an outsider, the similarities are just amazing. I don't know. Yeah. But go on. But why?
Because Ahmadis self-identify as Muslims and are very much in the West, in the discourse of what Islam is, I think that becomes a more important sort of angle to explore. But you were asking about Israel. So before Israel came into being, Ahmadis were very much against it. They're like, no, we don't want this. We don't think it's right. Don't displace the Palestinians. And the first foreign minister of Pakistan was an Ahmadi, Chaudhry Zafrullah Khan. And he gave some long, I don't know, it was 24-hour or some crazy long speech at the UN. And trying to basically push for why Israel should not be created as a country. And the Saudi king, I think at that time, there wasn't as much persecution at that time. And he had basically given him a medal or some kind of designation or some sort of honorary thank you because Ahmadis were, Chaudhry Zafrullah Khan was doing such an amazing job of pushing that, which most Muslims were grateful for and thankful for. Now, you can simultaneously push for, hey, we don't think it's fair to create this state, but at the same time say, look, now that it's created, we don't believe in, violence to sort of rectify that original wrong. We have to make peace and get along. So then now you will have Ahmadi missionaries in Haifa in Israel, and they're on good terms with, they're on good terms with local leaders around the world, because being antagonistic doesn't really serve you and your message of preaching.
But it hurts their image with other Muslims.
Sure.
If they're close to Israel, right? But when they do try to convert people to,
well, I wouldn't even say close to Israel. They just have amicable relations with everybody, including Israel.
Do you think that when they try to convert people, is their main target Sunni Muslims, or do they go for everybody equally?
It depends on the geography. So in Pakistan, it's sort of like all Muslims. Sunnis are usually a little bit, again, closer, right? Because they'll be like, hey, yeah, the first 4 Khulafa Rashidin, they accept that. Whereas with the Shia, it's harder to sell them on that, because then you got to go litigate the whole Ali succession thing. Right. So Shias are going to have a little barrier to converting to Ahmadi Islam than Sunnis will.
Oh, so for Ahmadis, it's easier to convert Sunnis than Shias.
Right, because so much of the original narrative is on the same page.
There. But I think even when in Israel, when they're converting, I think they stay away from trying to convert like Jews or Christians.
I don't think they stay away from it. They just won't maybe necessarily put a lot of effort
in it. They just, the main focus is Sunni Muslims.
But in the Indian subcontinent at the time, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was in a lot of debates and writing books. Right. He was very much trying to go after Christians as well. To some degree, it was to defend Islam against attacks from Christianity, so that Muslims wouldn't leave Islam for Christianity, where there was a lot of movement in that direction.
Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of shit that Ahmadi Muslims have to deal with, coming from other Muslims, like the passport situation? Is that
sure?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's still an issue. One thing I'll just add to the last point is in the West, I think Ahmadis are generally targeting, a bit of everybody. They'll target other Muslims who feel kind of lost, like, hey, I'm kind of open-minded and I'm more of a pacifist, and mainstream Islam doesn't seem to really support that narrative. So Ahmadis will try to go after, that audience as well.
Actually, this is so when it comes to the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of that, I think a lot of people are trying to, like, a lot of people are losing, the emotional, attachment they had to Islam because of that, and everybody is trying to, like, take from that as much as possible, right? Like, I think the Christians are trying to take from the Muslim community, the atheists are trying to take from that, and I think Ahmadi Muslims have been trying as much to be like, hey, you're tired of Sunni Islam? There's another option. Like, they have also, like, with all of the rise of mainstream media attention that these attacks have been getting, Ahmadis, and the interesting thing is that they have, what I've seen in their marketing is that the constant use of the word Khalifa, right? Because they're like, look, ISIS is trying to bring a Islamic Khalifa, and everybody thinks Islamic Khalifa now is like something extremely barbaric. But did you know that we already have a Khalifa? And not only does he not kill people, like he does this good thing. Like, so is that a common marketing tactic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a Vice News article, and it was something titled something sort of playful, like the world's chillest Khalifa or something.
Right.
Because they kind of just spent a date with him and see how he lived his life. And obviously, there's a huge difference. Right. It's a very pacifist community versus ISIS.
But they don't when they give to charity. I heard they only give to their own fellow. Like, they don't give to non-Ahmadis, do they?
No. That's a misnomer. And the thing is, there's so much. That sort of negative propaganda tactic known as FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. There's a lot of FUD that the rest of the Muslim world has put onto Ahmadis, so that even mainstream people who are not even Muslim, they can pick up on it and think, it's true. So, for example, people will say, Ahmadis have a different kalma than other Muslims, or they have a different Quran, or they pray differently, or they have a different, they don't believe in the 5 pillars. All of that.
Actually, they've done that. Sunnis have done that with Shias as well in Pakistan. Like, I think a significant number of Sunnis, and I would actually make up the kalma. I'd kind of egg them on. You know, they'd be like, "Oh, I heard Shias have a different kalama." I'm like, "Yeah, ours is La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, Aliyun Waliullah, wa Khomeini wa Ayatullah." They would believe it. They're like, "Really? Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's it. That's our
At one level, it's a joke, but at another level, when it's so pervasive, people, sort of believe that. So, and I forgot the point you were asking, or you wanted me to comment on, Armin.
The shit that Ahmadi Muslims have to deal with, like the passport situation.
Right. Okay.
Can they even go to Hajj, for example?
They can't. Technically, if they declare that they're Ahmadi, they're blocked from Hajj. So Ahmadis do go to Hajj, but what ends up, they don't declare. They just put Muslim and they don't. And the thing is, if somebody asks them point blank, then they're prepared to basically turn around at the airport and fly back.
Wait, so what if they're next to the Kaaba, next to the house of God, and they tell people that they're Ahmadi Muslims? What's going to happen? It's going to be...
Well, I mean, some people are maybe just sort of too busy in their own worship and they're not going to care. But the wrong people who pick up on that, that can be really problematic. I haven't heard of anything like that happen because most people who go there are very careful. But generally in the Muslim, in the Islamic world, in the Middle East, those countries, you don't advertise that you're Ahmadi. No. You don't.
Because you can go, Shias and Sunnis...
You don't have prayer halls. People secretly meet in homes and do their Jummah prayers together. You can't construct a mosque and put a sign on it and say this is an Ahmadi mosque.
So just to make it clear how bad the situation is, like, even though Sunnis and Shias, like, very much disagree with each other and many times hate each other, you could still go to Kaaba, you could still go to Mecca, and declare that you're a Shia, and you could still go to Saudi Arabia and do your Hajj, right? I know recently Iran has boycotted that, but that's beside the point. You could still do that. You could still, as a Shia, you could do that. But as an Ahmadi, if you declare that you're an Ahmadi, you can't go do the Hajj. Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the passport stuff you're talking about, for people who don't know, in Pakistan, declaring Ahmadis as non-Muslims is like built into their constitution through an amendment, because they're just so hung up on these.
That's actually true. That's not even a joke. Yeah.
No, like this is how.
So to get a passport, you basically have to sign a declaration that basically states that you believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, is non-Muslim. I think you have to say he's a kafir.
I have the exact wording here, so I can read it for you.
But before Ali reads it, let me just tell you, like, imagine you have a country, you have a constitution, like, oh, we're starting this country, these are our value. By the way, on the side note, fuck those group of people specifically.
That's exactly what it is.
You put that in your constitution, and you make sure you like. This is how much they hate these people. Like, you put that in the constitution. It's amazing. Go on, Ali. Read it.
And just to show the reality, I mean, this is really stunning. So I just want to get the audience. I want the audience to get a really good understanding of this. I have in front of me a Pakistani passport application form. And this is for everyone who wants to apply for a Pakistani passport, all Pakistani citizens. And here's what they have to sign. There's a section that says declaration in case of Muslims. I, so-and-so, son of blah, blah, blah. I hereby solemnly declare that, 1, I am a Muslim and believe in the absolute and unqualified finality of prophethood. Fine. Number 2, I do not recognize any person who claims to be a prophet in any sense of the word or of any description whatsoever after Muhammad, peace be upon him, and so on. Fine. Number 3, I consider Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani to be an imposter Nabi. Nabi means prophet. And also consider his followers, whether belonging to the Lahori or Qadiani group, to be non-Muslim.
That's a passport application.
Now, in a Pakistani passport, your religion is listed in the passport, right? And if you don't sign this, they will not declare you a Muslim. Pakistan. So what happens is, I am assuming, Sohail. Yeah, I am assuming, Sohail, that some Ahmadis just who want to be able to travel and do the Hajj and everything like that, they just sign this declaration. They're like, okay, screw it, I'll just sign it, and then they go. Or
from Pakistan, I don't know, but I know from other parts of the world, Ahmadis do go for Hajj. And they, there's like little travel groups, and you're in a group from Canada will go, and nobody really asks, so it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell. But how people from Pakistan do this, I don't know. Maybe if they're lucky enough to have like dual citizenship somewhere, they use that other passport, or
No, but either they have to sign this and say, I am not a Muslim.
Yeah.
Right. or either they have to sign this and say, okay, I deny everything I believe, or they have to they refuse to sign it and they don't get the Islamic status, which means they can never go on Hajj or anything like that.
I don't have the actual figures on this, but my gut is that most of them will not sign that. Their passport will say Ahmadi, and they forsake the opportunity to go to Hajj because they're not going to sign something. They're not going to declare something truthful.
Can they just so they don't have taqiyya?
Taqiyya.
Yeah. And for everybody else, I never heard of that word until probably 2 years ago.
It's a Shia thing, man.
Well, actually, okay. So here's the thing: I didn't hear that word much before until I left Islam either. But technically, it's not as bad as people make it sound to be. Like there are a lot of more problematic teachings in Islam. It's basically telling you, like, hey, if you're about to die, if somebody's going to kill you for your faith, lie about your faith. Like, that's not really
because human life is more precious than in the moment.
Right. That's not a really bad teaching. And as far as that goes, I think it's absolutely on point. So. Right. Yeah. So, but there's also white lies, another version of taqiyya that also kind of makes sense. But like basically, is telling another. So there's the fear taqiyya and there's another I forgot what it's called. Another version of taqiyya. The fear taqiyya is like if somebody's going to kill you, lie about your faith. But also another taqiyya is that if you telling your faith to somebody could cause hostility, then just don't lie to them, but just don't tell them, like by omission, right? So
for clarity, in Ahmadiyya Islam, we've never really gone into this stuff. No. It's just sort of like, if you need to preserve life.
Would it be considered a sin if you sign that passport application? You're like, hey, I just need a fucking passport. I don't mean it. I'm just gonna.
Well, I think you still can get a passport. It's just going to list your. If you don't sign that,
you're just not going to be listed as a Muslim.
That's it. So you still get a passport. You can still travel.
Like, there's a lot of Christians.
What's the point of having that? So what's the point of having that in the passport application?
Because then you don't get to say that you're a Muslim on your passport. You're going to be listed as a non-Muslim.
So they're forcing Ahmadi Muslims to declare say that we're not Muslims.
And what's the consequence? Like, what's life like it's nowhere. So the worst place to be an Ahmadi is Pakistan, right? Just like the worst place to be. Yeah, I'm not going to compare anymore because it seems like you don't like that. But what are some shit that Ahmadis have to deal with in Pakistan?
So there's sort of two levels. There's the what's in the law, and it's definitely the discrimination is in the law, and then there's also sort of the factor of mob rule, sort of mob justice. So you fear sort of both levels. At a practical level, in the Constitution, you're a non-Muslim. If you say Assalamu alaikum, you call your place of worship a mosque. You hurt the religious feelings of Muslims by posing, or sort of projecting that you are a Muslim. This is some gray areas there too. Then you can get a pretty hefty fine and up to 3 years in jail
for saying Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the ordinance in a long time, so people, fact check me on that and double check it. But
for posing as a Muslim.
Yeah, I mean, things like, I remember specifically about, you can't call your place of worship a mosque, so it has to be just a center or whatever, So what the government would do, there'd be police officers wiping the kalma that's, like printed on the outside of the mosque. They'd be wiping it off in Ahmadi mosque because they're like, that's Islamic.
What's kalma? You're not allowed to.
Yeah, that's the Islamic creed of faith. There's no God. There's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So it's the Arabic version of that on the outside of the mosque, and they will actually wipe that off. And police will be like standing by or helping, and because they're like, look, you can't make this place even pretend to look like a mosque because you guys aren't Muslim. So, but it also becomes difficult where promotions in higher posts, whether in private sector, but mostly in government sector, it's like, well, that guy's an Ahmadi. We're not gonna promote him. So you get held back. Schools with scholarships or top placements, if you're an Ahmadi, you can get held back from those opportunities. Right. So it's sort of systematic discrimination. At one level, it's at the government sanction, and then the next, that government is meant to lead, and then that creates and feeds the mob mentality
Right.
of, hey, just in everyday culture and society, we're going to discriminate against these people.
And I heard Imran Khan was also responsible. By the way, is it true that the current Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, was also had a hand in discrimination against Ahmadis at some point?
Well, so it's a little bit more complex than that. I think I don't follow Pakistani politics very closely, so people can will be able to give more nuance than me. But at a surface level, when Imran Khan started off his politics, he seemed to say a lot of progressive things, and I think a lot of Ahmadis around the world were like very hopeful. And I think for a large part of his career, he actually meant well in that, and maybe he still does. But as you get more and more closer to electability, you almost have to bow down to those hardline elements. And so, for example, there was a very famous Ahmadi who's, I believe, a professor of economics at, I think, in Harvard, Atif Mia.
Atif Mia, he's actually one of the top 25 economists in the world.
Yeah, so this guy's a big deal,
listed,
super smart. And, he was ready to leave America and go back to Pakistan to help the country. And a lot of Ahmadis have this love for Pakistan, and yet the country doesn't love them back. And it's very tragic. Right. And so he was ready to go back, and Imran Khan was like, hey, yeah, I got to tap this amazing guy. Right. But then there was so much pressure, like, how can your cabinet have this Ahmadi, or they would say the derogatory term, which is Qadiani. And so basically Imran Khan had to let him go. So I don't think Imran Khan wanted to, but he knew it was just politically unpalatable. He couldn't survive it if he kept it.
Right. So I'll add to that just because of the Pakistani politics thing that I think you're exactly right. So the thing with Imran Khan is, unfortunately, all of these people Imran Khan, Nawaz Sharif, all of these guys who came out, they will condemn the attacks against the Ahmadis. They will try to be progressive, but none of them have taken the step of removing that crap from the passport application. Yeah. And as long as you have that, the antipathy towards and the hostility towards Ahmadi is going to continue. And the Atif Mia isn't the first example. So a lot of people may not know this. Some of the famous Ahmadi Muslims in the world, Mahershala Ali is the Oscar-winning actor who's absolutely brilliant. He's an Ahmadi Muslim. The other really famous example is Abdul Salam. Abdul Salam is the only Muslim ever to win a Nobel Prize in any science category. So he won the physics Nobel Prize. He was a nuclear physicist. And he won the prize along with Steven Weinberg, who's a famous atheist. You know the guy who said that, good people do good things, evil people do evil things, but for good people to do evil things, it takes religion. So that was him. And Abdul Salam and Weinberg both together received the Nobel Prize in physics. So when Abdul Salam got this, Pakistan he had to leave Pakistan. He had to set up a lab in Italy. He wanted to send money back to Pakistan, and Pakistan refused. Like, they took the only ever science Nobel laureate ever in the Muslim world overall, and they're like, he's not a Muslim. We're just going to reject him. Wow. So it was, that is how deep the hostility is towards the Ahmadis.
And let me know, both of you, if you think this is the reason why, because a lot of people might think, from all the groups of people that a lot of Muslims could hate so much, why is it that they're obsessed about certain groups more than the others? And I think people don't understand how, if you're just a Christian and you just have your own book, okay, fine, just go be your own, be Christian, be Jewish, be atheist, right? God will deal with you. But to take some of the most, Muslims are very sensitive about the fact that Muhammad was the last prophet. And to take that and all of a sudden bring another prophet after that, right? Or to change the Quran in any way. Or to, these are, they're very sensitive about this. This is, messing with their ideology, right? And I think that's...
And for clarification, Ahmadis haven't changed the Quran. It's the same.
No, I'm just giving examples of things that you could get them to really piss them off.
You could get riled up over that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
If you bring a new book and say, for example, this is my religion, go do whatever you want, right? But if you say, I'm going to change I have a Quran, I just removed 2 chapters. right? They're
Right.
like, what the heck? Like that is a no-no, right? Or
That,
it's like
that's
I have another Islam, I have I have a prophet after Muhammad. Like that's a
that
no-no.
starts
Yeah.
wars. It starts genocides.
Right.
It's yeah. It is pretty. It's pretty fascinating. Like I think that. But anyway, go ahead. Just respond to that. I was going to add something to it, but
No, is that
no.
is that the reason you also think like?
Well, it's hard to say because I wasn't there in the sort of, the early days, but some of the narrative I would get growing up as an Ahmadi was Ahmadiyyat was so much more palatable than mainstream Islam. They were very successful at converting people in the early days, and the existing ulama, the sort of religious clerics, they felt threatened. Their power base was going, and so the hostility grew. Whether that's really the narrative, maybe somebody lived there at that time could, I mean, it sounds very pretty. I can understand how that might just be more PR,
Yeah.
but maybe it's real. I wasn't there. I can't say.
There's another thing I think that is even more powerful. So the Ahmadiyya sect is not only is it something that's considered blasphemous or it's apostasy for a lot of mainstream Muslims, but compared to say the Nizari Ismailis, whose belief system, by the way, which we won't get into right now, is like many orders of magnitude more blasphemous and heretical than the Ahmadis, but they keep it secret. So they don't proselytize. They have extreme levels of secrecy where, people who are, my wife comes from a Ismaili background. She said, I know a lot of it, but other people I know, they don't even tell their spouses what the actual nature of the theological beliefs are. So with the Ahmadis, it's very different in the sense that they not only hold a view that is considered heretical by the mainstream Muslims,
But they preach it.
but they go out and they proselytize
It's a missionary sect.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because
It's a
their
missionary
angle
sect.
is to take over the world, isn't
They
it?
have their own TV channels. No, their angle is to spread the faith like
It
Christianity.
spread the faith, and basically, they have prophecies that one day most of the world will be Muslim and Ahmadiyya.
Yeah.
Right?
I think
So-
that's why they're targeted more.
And actually, I gotta plug somebody's book. Afzal Opal, Dr. Afzal Opal. He wrote a book called Moderate Fundamentalists, and he talks about the cognitive science of religion, but he uses Ahmadiyyat as the backdrop because his father was an Ahmadi missionary. He's deceased now, but his father, so he grew up in that world. He saw it, but then he's got the cognitive science of religion background, and he writes about a concept called minimally counterintuitive differences. And also maximally counterintuitive differences. So when things are like maximally counterintuitive, it speaks to what you were just talking about, Ali, about those larger differences. And when people see those larger differences, they're like, oh, that's just so different. Who cares?
Who cares?
Or to some degree,
It's not a threat.
who cares? Plus, they're so secretive anyway, it's not a threat.
Right.
But when you are, and this is where I'm saying that, Ahmadis are actually very close to Sunnis more than Shias in some levels, except for these couple of things that are, yes, they're big, but they're, you can semantically work around them. When you have something that seems so close and the differences are minimally counterintuitive,
It's a threat.
then that creates more friction and more of a threat because it's easier to make that jump.
Right. So, the main goal is like they actually think the Ahmadi Muslims think that they one day like they're going to keep advocating. Like they're very optimistic about their future, right? Like
Yeah,
one
I
day
remember
the
there's
whole
this
world.
prophecy. I've got to find it because I haven't looked at it in a long time, but something to the effect of, it'll be 3 centuries and there'll be sort of the victory of it.
I mean, it's very interesting that
And 1
people-
century is gone now.
a
2
religion
more
that
to
is
go.
only 10 to 20 million right now thinks that one day most of the world becomes it's kind of cute, I guess. I don't know, but go on.
I was just going to say, if you want, we can sort of talk briefly about the whole population issue because that is a major scandal for the community.
Tell me.
So basically, for the longest time, like in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, the Ahmadis would generally say, oh, it's a community around 10 million. There'd be some people who are saying, oh, it's probably not even that big. But everybody would kind of accept the 10 million figure. For the longest time, that was the case. Now, the fourth Khalifa of the movement, Mirza Tahir Ahmad, who's passed away in 2003, he had, for most of the 90s, been really pushing the Tabligh, which again is the Urdu term for proselytizing or preaching or dawah. And so he was pushing the Tabligh and like, you must bring people to the faith. And, this year I want every Ahmadi to bring 1 person or 2 people or whatever. And so a lot, there was a lot of sermons and that was a surge of activity. Then what happened in the late 90s, they make this big sort of hullabaloo at their annual convention in London of the international bets, or basically conversions or acceptance of Ahmadiyya Islam. And so they had announced numbers around the world, right? And it was a big deal. And I think it was like starting in 1997, I have to dig this up, to 2002, 2003, the numbers went from 10 million to 200 million total Ahmadis in the world. And over the span of a couple of years, the figure for India was that there were 80 million, roughly 80 million Ahmadis in India. And at the time, there was only 150 million Muslims in India. So at that point, you're saying that 1 in 2 Ahmadis, one in two Muslims in India was an Ahmadi, which is completely, there's not enough mosques built out there. If you just run into people in the street and do a poll, you wouldn't get anywhere those numbers.
Right. Yeah.
And so what did end up happening? And you can go in, I love the internet. You can go in the Wayback Machine and you can see the official page of the Ahmadiyya community saying, 200 million, previously 170 million, 150, and they'd have these big numbers. 1 year they'd be like 40 million people have joined Ahmadiyya worldwide this year. And, a lot of people would soak that up. The Khalifa of the time would be at an annual convention, maybe in Germany, and he'd be like saying these numbers and people would be cheering, and it's like it's on video. I've got a couple of video clips of that too, and that doesn't normally get circulated now. So then what happened is, after all of that, people were like, "Wait a minute, this is not adding up.
That can't be right."
And so after that, the website, again, if you go to the Wayback Machine, you look and it'll say a community who numbers in the tens of millions. Okay, well, what does that mean? That means either from 20 million to 190 million. Right. It's completely ambiguous because they know they had to walk that back.
Right.
But they've never given a public apology or correction, like, hey, we got it wrong. We know we announced it and we were like, sort of cheering it on. Look how successful we are. God is on our side. Look at all these numbers. And now it's just crickets. It's silent. They don't mention it. And it's ambiguously referenced so that people won't dig into it. Now, if you pressure an Ahmadi, like on Twitter or, they'll try to have a private conversation. But if they have to have a public one, they'll say, look, yeah, there was mistakes were made and we've corrected that.
Right.
But there's never been a public thing, because if they announce it publicly, a lot of people will be like, what? Wait a minute, there's not 200 million anymore? Most Ahmadi Muslims are still in the dark about this.
Right.
Yeah. They should have hired Sean Spicer, right? The guy who did the about Trump's inauguration numbers.
Yeah.
So right now we're on the 5th Khalifa, right?
We're on the 5th Khalifa, yeah.
We're in the 5th. He just recently came to Vancouver. He met with Trudeau.
Okay, yeah.
And there's pictures, there's a lot of Westerners here love it. They're like, oh, look, they're wearing suits and ties and it looks like a business. They're, they're pro-capitalism and they feel like this is like, why, like a lot of people here like, yeah, this is Islam we can get behind. So they're doing their PR very well.
See, Khan does that too. I mean,
I tell people that, look, even if you peg Ahmadis back at 10 million,
right.
If they're only 1% of the Muslim population worldwide.
By the way, I don't think that.
Yeah,
but like I'm just telling what other people say. I don't believe in Islam. Just want to make it clear. Like I'm against any form of reform or all of this is nonsense. But go on, sorry.
Yeah, but so even if they're 1% of the Muslim population worldwide, in the West at least, it feels like they're maybe 10% or 15% or even 20% of sort of the media coverage, the feel-good stories. And I remember Douglas Murray once wrote about this, where he's like, every feel-good story you see in Europe published about Muslims who are doing charity work or protesting terrorism or whatever, or not in my name, that kind of stuff, the kind of things that people have been wanting, generally, most of the time, it's the Ahmadis who are behind that. And part of it is because they're very organized, but part of it is because they very much own that narrative. They don't feel like they need to they don't have to do gymnastics around that, where other Muslims are tread a little bit more carefully about clear statements denouncing things.
They're banking on all the negative PR that the Sunni Islam and Shia Islam is getting.
Yeah, but they try to be careful not calling out Sunnis per se. They're just like, hey, look at what Islam can be, because what they also want to do is not upset the Sunnis who might be like, hey, these guys are expressing a lot of leadership. Maybe I should just convert over. These are the leaders of today in the Muslim Ummah, at least in the West.
What are some of the end time narratives? I was watching a video of some Ahmadi scholars, and they were talking about some Jewish conspiracies and like weird shit like that. Like,
well, I don't know if that's necessarily tied to end times, but for example, the fourth Khalifa, Mirza Tahir Ahmad, he wrote in his book, I think it was in 1991, The Gulf Crisis and the New World Order. It's a compilation of his sermons. And in there, he talks about, the protocols of the elders of Zion. So he's very much in favor that that is real. And so there's a sort of an exegesis of that. I think it's called Waters Flowing Westward or Eastward or something like that. And so he talks about that, and he's pointing people to that book saying, I know people poo-poo the protocols of the elders of Zion, but people should read this other thing, which basically explains how much of it lines up and stuff. I haven't dug into that stuff, but I did create a video once, a short clip of him talking about that, where he's very much in favor of it. Current apologist for Ahmadiyyat was saying, look, he just thinks it's a possibility and he thinks it's important to talk about. But they, so they try to water it down a little bit. But I actually got a YouTube copyright takedown notice from the Tahir Foundation, which puts up a lot of his videos.
Wow.
Because for sharing that clip. Because, they...
But it's fair use. You were reviewing it, right?
Well, I wasn't reviewing it. I just shared it at that time because at the time I wasn't revealing my voice. So it's just a clip. Maybe if I take it again and actually comment on it, it'll be better. But it's sort of like they, and it wasn't like a 30-second soundbite. I'm doing like the full, not the full, but like the 10 minutes or 8 minutes or something that he's talking about that, so that people don't say, oh, it's out of context or whatever, because I wanted to highlight that bit. But they're very sensitive to that, which tells me that, we're hitting a nerve.
But it's not just them. Like I saw some so-called scholars talking about their end-time narratives, and it was very anti-Jewish. It was a very kind of like a lot of the hadiths that Sunnis and Shias have were like.
That's
Jews.
Common to Islam generally. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Right. So those hadiths, what a lot of Sunnis and Shias who rejected Mirza Ghulam Ahmad would be like, hey, you didn't fulfill these hadiths literally, and being wrapped in these two garments and descending to the next to the tower in Damascus and all, there's all this kind of stuff. And again, I haven't looked at that in a few years, but a lot of that stuff, the Ahmadis would say a lot of that has been exaggerated by people over time. They're not reliable hadiths. And to the degree that there's some truth to them, they're metaphorical symbolisms for different things that would happen. And so then all the apologetic creative forces come in and they explain it away.
But these videos weren't even they weren't trying to make excuses for it. Like the stuff that they were saying, these scholars were very much anti-Jewish.
Were these Ahmadi scholars?
Yeah. I could share it. I'll share it to you later.
Okay.
If I could find it. But I'm just saying that maybe they're not blowing shit up, but a lot of the misogyny is still there, right? A lot of the anti-Jewish feelings are still there.
So the anti-Jewish thing, I don't really see that overtly in your day-to-day community. You'll have Ahmadis who, through their official organizations are helping Jewish synagogues that get vandalized and things like that.
What about misogyny? Is there a lot of that there?
Okay, so and that's a bigger topic. The Ahmadis will stand by the verses in the Quran that say, 2 female witnesses for 1 male witness, but they will try to contextualize it and say, look, it's just for financial transactions, and it's 2 witnesses, not.
But they have no woman leader, for example.
They don't have a woman khalifa. The women don't vote for the khalifa. They're not in the top level consultative bodies.
Right.
And I actually wanted to, sorry, I wanted to interject and say this. I haven't talked for a while, so I've been very good, Armin.
You've been quiet for too long.
I'm listening to you guys. I talked a lot before. Everybody knows that. I don't stop talking. But I have to say this, that whenever we talk about even the Ismaili sect, right, who claim to be very progressive, they all claim gender equality. The Ahmadiyya, the Ismaili sect, they all claim gender equality. And they say, we're, modernizing, modern world, everything. They've never had a single female spiritual leader, single female imam, female khalifa, female Aga Khan. It has not happened. And it's not that there haven't been good, worthy successors. The current Aga Khan's daughter is actually a brilliant woman, but she is not going to be his successor. It's just not going to happen.
For Ahmadis, we'll say, look, to be a successor, it's also a spiritual successor. Spiritual successor has to lead prayers, and when they're menstruating, they can't do that. So part of, they're like a part-time leader. So God has commissioned prophets and
which is misogynistic inherently as well, right? So it's
a bit of a tautology. I mean, they create the distinction. Right. God could have just as easily said, "Hey, even if you're menstruating, no big deal."
I am very. Yeah, I was, because you were talking, Armin, you said that they reject violence against these people, even though they disapprove on them, and I have to mentioned that I had the honor of being mentioned. Like my tweet was mentioned by the current, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmed, right? The
By the
current
current
Khalifa.
Khalif?
Yes,
Really?
on in 2016 on one of his Friday sermons.
Wow.
Because I had seen a meme and I didn't really think. I thought it was a mainstream Islamic thing.
Right.
So yeah, I was very partly in the wrong on this. But there was a sort of meme where it had his face and it said, the quote was, "Those who shed the blood of the innocent have nothing to do with Islam and the Holy Prophet." Right. So I took that quote and I said, and by innocent, we don't mean infidels, gays, lesbians, apostates, and women who wear shorts. It was tongue in cheek, but then people picked up on the fact that this was he's Ahmadi, so even though they disapprove of those things, that doesn't mean that they shed their blood. And I was talking about it in a mainstream Islamic context, so it caused a lot of stuff.
And that can cause confusion. And I even try to like clarify. We sometimes just say Islam or Muslims in general for brevity, but sometimes we have to be.
And I was speaking about that specific quote. That have nothing to do with Islam and the Holy Prophet. I was like, no, that's not true. There are many people who do shed the blood of the innocent. They have everything to do with Islam and the Holy Prophet. So that quote I was challenging. And they're going
to take it as if it's against their version of Islam.
But he did mention the tweet, and he was really upset about it. He's like, hey, we murtad on Twitter, and it was pretty funny. I was like, wow, this is like my claim to fame. It's funny. But in any case.
One thing before Ali, before we go to the Patreon questions, right? Ali, have you documented the Patreon questions in the live chat?
I have them.
Okay, great.
I got them.
So I just want to get this, and this is something I don't know. I'm just checking with you if it's true or not. For example, if you look at like Mormons, for example, right? If you look at what they focus on and the things they say, they mostly in their own community. They focus on the things that makes them different from other Christians. But when they are trying to be accepted in society, they focus on the things that makes them similar to other Christians, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, the Bible is not very a major. Even Jesus is not a major focus for Mormons, right? It's mostly the books that's the Book of Mormon and their own people. They mostly focus on that. Is it the same thing when it comes to Ahmadis? Like, is
sort of, and that's a really good point because I want to make a point here, and it ties into a few things that we've been talking about. A friend of mine who actually came out publicly as an Ahmadi as well, plug for his website, dreamedofyou.wordpress.com.
Oh yeah.
And he,
great guy.
Just last Ramadan, he said, "I'm going to study the Quran." He read it and he was like, "Okay, I don't believe in this stuff." But so he's got a great blog post about his story. He's a software guy, so he ran like sort of a word like content cloud based on the Khalifa's the last X years worth of sermons, and Muhammad doesn't come up as much as like Ahmadi specific terms, right? He's got this like.
There we go.
I've got to get that graphic and show it. And what ends up happening is when you have a religious movement like this, they'll say, look, the hadiths, there's so many that are unreliable, they're out of context, blah, blah, blah. So Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of Ahmadiyyat, he wrote like 80-something, I think 81 books or something like that. Quite a lot of books. So he wrote so many of those, and then the Khalifas are giving sermons all the time. And so Ahmadis are basically saying, look, these people are divinely inspired. The Khalifa is representative of God. So I don't need to go and look at unreliable hadiths or whatever. And I don't need to just look at the surface version of the Quran. I can look at their exegesis, the way they explain it, the way they talk about it in the sermons, the rulings they give, because these are God's representatives on earth. And so what ends up happening is the content that gets cycled and that is in the minds of everybody is more the things that the Khalifas over the last 100 years have said, more the things that are from Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's writing in a more modern time where he's got more better apologetics for Islam than stuff from 1300 years ago. Because he knows, like, I got to sort of patch this up to make it more palatable.
Right.
So then what's in the Ahmadi Muslim psyche is so much this stuff and less so
the Quran.
The Quran is there, but it's, the way it's taken, you even look at translations. Ahmadis reject an eternal hell, and so they translate it in a way where it's
that's the major theme of the Quran.
But they say no, it's temporary. You get you get healed of your sins, and then you move on, right? So
I like that. I think I'm gonna convert.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is a lot of Ahmadis will say, look, Islam is really peaceful. You other Muslims have got the wrong version. You need to come to us. But the thing is, the way Ahmadis are able to like not have anyone ever in their history over 120 years or so, ever have been involved in any act of terrorism anywhere is because what's being fed to them is a better message vis-a-vis, violence and things like that. It's a much better message than what you're prone to as a mainstream Muslim picking up at the mosque where there's maybe some elements who are a little bit jihadi and, sort of more hardcore. So that's how Ahmadis are able to do this. But they will put the PR out there that, look, this is what Islam is. Islam can be this way. But really, it's because they've got this other narrative glommed on, which takes the limelight and the mind share of people.
Right.
But this has been very helpful to me generally, engaging with them, because usually when I started doing this and I started coming into criticizing Islam and writing against it and to having these theological arguments, I got a lot of response from Ahmadis. And it really helped me when I was writing my book, because a lot of the apologetics, right? A lot of the apologetic arguments about why Islam is peaceful and why it's nonviolent and everything's taken out of context. I preempted a lot of those arguments in my book, but the reason I was aware of them
really well, I got to say, really, really well.
Thank you. But the reason I learned that by engaging with Ahmadis, because the kind of apologetics American Muslims are coming up with now to defend Islam, like the Ahmadis have been doing this for decades and decades, and they've really honed them to the extent that every violent verse they have a huge explanation for it. So it is much more.
There's a lot of intellectual leadership from the Ahmadis in modern day. And people could look at other sort of revivalists, people like Abdu and things like that. There were other thinkers that predated Mirza Ghulam Ahmad who thought like this. Right. But, his magic was kind of synthesizing it together and packaging it up and giving it a label.
See, this is what I think Ahmadi Islam is actually extremely dangerous. And this is not me talking about Ahmadi Muslims themselves. Just this whole, like, unknowingly these people are doing something extremely dangerous, because their whole message, I mean, they would among themselves they say like we're Ahmadis, but when they go out and say this is Islam, right? This is Islam,
they give air cover for the concept of Islam in general.
Right. I mean, they don't focus on the real teachings of the Quran and the Hadith and Muhammad, and they have their other things, but they sell that on Islam, and basically they're giving legitimacy and authority to the Quran and to all of its horrible teaching, even if they don't focus on it, right?
Yeah. Now, to be fair to them, they would say, look, we've interpreted it in a way where it's not the horrible thing you think it is, right? So, but they absolutely give, I say they give air cover to the general concept of Islam. And so a lot of people think, oh, okay, Islam isn't that problematic.
Right.
Well, mainstream Islam, followed by 99% of the Islamic world, is the problematic thing that a lot of people think it is. There's elements of, there's good and bad everywhere, but the point is that the version that Ahmadis portray is not an accurate representation of what Islam is in the majority of the world.
Are you going to make more videos on showing that exactly, like going into the details about what they're getting wrong? Or no?
I do want to talk about there's so many other topics, and my first video, I didn't want to make it that long, but I just felt like if I just did one short video, there'll be a whole bunch of people saying, oh, what about this? What about that? Or you never studied this, and what about
You did the same thing. You preempted a lot of and it was beautiful the way that you did it. Like
the only complaint I have is that the double speed feature doesn't work in your video for some reason. Do you know why?
Oh, I don't know why. No, I don't know why.
The what feature?
The double speed feature.
Yeah, some people would say, "Hey, you speak too slow," and some people would be like, "Hey, is this an ASMR video?"
I listen to everything on double speed or triple speed if it's a podcast. But for your video, that feature is not there. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I didn't even control that. It just
and you do have a very I am getting this as a consensus from many other people who've heard it as well. But I also think this a very sexy voice. I mean, you sound very, very good. Even now,
a bit too sexy. It's distracting.
And when you slow it down, it's even more. So I think that there will be a lot of people who will just get your message subconsciously just because they like hearing your voice. So
part of it for me, I wanted to say something really quick about that, is that my audience, people would be like, hey, you could do this, and the video would go more viral, and it would do this. And I said, look, I'm purposely not doing some of those things because I don't need 1 million subscribers. I don't need 1,000 subscribers. I don't need a lot of views. I want it to be as if I'm talking to my Ahmadi Muslim friends and family, who for a lot of these people, even the concept of an ex-Muslim is like, what the hell? It's so new that if I don't kind of slow it down and give them time to kind of digest while I'm speaking, it's going to fly over their head. And that's that's not a knock on their intelligence. It's just, it's such a shocker. I want sort of time to process. And it's targeted to those people. Yeah. And for the mainstream YouTube world who's like, oh man, this is too slow, or I'm not interested. I'm like, you know what? For you guys, it's not for you. If you get benefit from it, great. But it was really, I sent it out to the world, but it's really for those people that I wanted to talk to, even if it's just a few hundred people, because from those few hundred, that will become a few thousand. Right. And a few tens of thousands, and then it will grow from there organically.
That's exactly what my approach was too.
Patron questions.
So I just have a couple of things I really, really want to touch on.
Okay.
It'll be very, very quick. First of all, your parents and your family, have they gotten pushback from the Ahmadiyya community that they're part of because of your video?
Not formally, not yet that I have heard of. But there's a lot of informal chatter, and that gets back to my parents. And, they're religious people. They're devoutly religious, but they haven't studied it, obviously, to the level that any of us have. And so they don't understand why even things should be critical. So yeah, some of that's come through. But what it is I think 90% of the community is a bunch of people who just see it as an identity. It's a sort of most Ahmadis are Punjabi in ethnicity. It's, sometimes I jokingly refer to it as a Punjabi social club. And so they feel like, why are you attacking our beautiful social club or community, right? And the thing is, there's this beautiful community, and I love a lot of the camaraderie, the support people give when somebody dies and they go to their homes. And there's so many beautiful things there. And I think a lot of people see me criticizing Ahmadiyyat and saying, why are you attacking that thing? It's so beautiful. And to them, I would say, look, I'm not attacking that. And I agree with you. That part is so beautiful. And I really like that part of the community. I'm attacking this other thing over here, which is the theology and the pronouncements. Which
they have
in it that most people are not thinking about. That's what I'm attacking.
Right. There's also this issue that, not only are you attacking this community, but you're attacking this community that everybody else has been attacking from the outside for so long. Right. And now you're doing it
Why
from the inside.
Why are you adding to that, they're saying?
But I got from your video, I got the view, and I don't know if you have articulated in these words, but my advice is that you should, is just say, listen, I want to be part of this community. I love this community. I've always been in it. I think it's beautiful. I want to be part of it, and I just don't want the ticket to be part of it to be the fact that I have to believe in all these things and adhere to all these rules. Yeah. I want to be able to think the way I want and still be part of this community, regardless of what I believe, without the ideological burden. And I think that is a way to probably show more solidarity with the community than the people of the community are showing. In a way, right?
I think that's more possible with like Ismailis, I think. With Ahmadis, since it's so built in, like to be part of this community, there's these conditions that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad laid out, that technically speaking, it's so infused. It's almost like I did formally resign from the community because I said, I'm not, this was a couple of years ago. And it's not, and I wrote a very cordial letter to the current head of it in Canada, who I used to work with a lot when I was young, and he was a mentor to me, and I loved him, and I still think he's a brilliantly kind man. I'm going to disagree with him on theology. There's probably a lot of administrative decisions he's made that I'm going to disagree with, but my interactions with him had always been wonderful. And I wrote him a nice letter, and I said, I'm resigning, and kind of gave an outline. But I knew that I can't, because I'm respecting their rules, which technically say, look, if you want to be a part of this community, these are our conditions. But what I try to do is maintain the friendships I have with the community. If there's some elder in the community who's passed away, I would still go to their viewing at the mosque. There would be a funeral prayer. I would stand in the prayer line, and I would just be in silence. I'm not praying, but I'm in silence because I'm trying to show my respect and solidarity in the way that they would have liked to have been remembered without compromising my beliefs. And there's ways to do that.
And did your family knew that you have left before you had the video coming out?
Yeah. So, I started questioning at 19 when I was super active in preaching, and they saw me having conversations with religious leaders. There was a missionary in charge at the time. There was a national secretary. And by the way, I've got a blog post, reasononfaith.org/thethings-we-think, and that details this kind of story. And in there, I'm having all these conversations about my religious doubts. So they saw me becoming, very religious. Even the missionary came into my house and told my dad, he's like, your son's more religious than you are. So they're not going to complain about my religiosity. And then when they saw me finally put my questions in a book, and the missionary and the national secretary at the time, the whole religious leadership in Canada, nobody could answer it. And definitely not officially. They saw that, look, our son has done his work. So instead of getting upset at me for leaving the faith and I was not praying anymore, I was like, I don't believe in this stuff. I don't define myself, but I know I'm not that. I know that's not true.
Right.
And so they looked at it and they didn't come after me. They were like, oh, but we wish you would pray and things like that. But they wouldn't be hard about it. Instead, they would turn their sort of cannons on the religious leadership and be like, guys, you need to give my son answers, because they're under the impression that Islam is true, Ahmadiyyat is true. We're always talking about the true Islam and we have the answers. We're so logical. We're so rational. We're smarter than all the other Muslims and this and that. And they're like, what the hell? We're a missionary sect and you can't even answer my son's questions. So that was where their focus was.
Wow.
So,
pretty supportive parents then, hey?
Yeah. I mean, to a degree. So for many years they knew, and for many years I was like, I'm just going to live my life. But I was never living authentically. I was always careful of, I can't tip off that I don't actually believe, and because I don't want to upset them. It affects you in so many ways, and this is what we talk about. It's not about terrorism. For a lot of us, it's just the everyday life. Like as a guy, for example, and I detail this in one of my posts. I think it's called Lessons Learned, one of my recent ones. I was in my early 20s. Just meeting up with a couple of friends who were girls from high school, sort of like a reunion after a couple of years, platonic friends for lunch. And I had a sibling who said, you met up with a couple of friends that were girls. Were there any guys there? And I said, no, there was just a couple of my friends. And they're like, what if somebody saw you? There was no other guys there. It looks bad and things like, and, especially when you've got, sisters who have to get married and things like that, the perceptions are so dire. Now, to be fair, I think my siblings would probably relax about it now. But back then, especially when everybody's sort of at a marriage age, it was a big deal. And so you're constantly like monitoring yourself, which means, even if you're like, okay, I don't believe in this, I need to go meet somebody else that I could marry and date, and you've got a girlfriend who wants to hold your hand in public. Well, sorry, you can't do that, or you're being really careful, or you're paranoid. Because somebody from the mosque might see you and then they'll tell your parents, people will gossip, you'll get back to your parents. And it's like, I just wanted to live my life. And so you go, for so many years, I didn't realize that I was living inauthentically, not even moving on with my life, because I'm like, well, I don't want to lie because I don't like lying. And I don't want to put my parents in an awkward situation. So you take the Venn diagram, the subset of what's sort of acceptable, and you're basically this robotic shell going through life.
Yeah.
So did your parents watch your coming out video?
They will be. My dad's a bit hard of hearing, so some of the parts with music, he was like, I can't understand this. So I've got to update the script, and maybe he can read it.
Right.
And I will.
And they're supportive of the video.
I showed them the first 10 minutes the day before it went out to give them a heads up. But I purposely let them know that I'm working on something. But I didn't give them too many details because I didn't want them to be going to the imam at the mosque. Hey, our son's working on a video. You need to come over and do an intervention on him. Right. Because it's way beyond that.
Is that what they would? Is that what their reaction would have been?
They tried that, I think, about 10,
live stream the exorcism.
Wait, say that. They tried
10, 12 years ago. 10, 12 years ago, they bought a really nice imam, a really genuine guy. Actually, I feature him in my video as a really kind man. And we had a nice chat and stuff. But
so sorry, let's make this clear. Your parents brought an imam to your home just to save you?
Well, to try to figure out if they could sort of address my religious doubts so that I could come back to the community.
They wanted you back, but they weren't aggressive about it. They were nice about it, but they still wanted you back. Is that a good summary? Okay.
Yeah, and I think most Ahmadi Muslim parents are good that way. Now, there's a subreddit that we have for ex-Ahmadi Muslims and questioning Ahmadi Muslims. And well, I guess we'll put it in the show notes, but basically it's Reddit r/Islam_Ahmadiyya. And in there, you can see so many people who are in dire situations, who are feeling like they're going to get disowned, they're going to get kicked out. There was even a post, I think, today or yesterday of somebody in that situation. But most Ahmadis would disavow that sort of behavior. And they'd say that's not
so
right.
your parents were nicer than average. Are there? Do you know if there's a lot of people leaving the Ahmadi faith?
So, Ahmadis, generally Muslims in general are concerned about social perceptions, and they're really quiet about it. With Ahmadis, I'd like to say instead of 6 degrees of separation, it's like 3 degrees of separation around the world. Everybody sort of I can have 2 hops and know somebody like in the Philippines who's an Ahmadi.
Right.
So everybody is so concerned about perceptions that even if they're not religious, they won't say it because it's so taboo. It affects so much of your social network, the friends you're with. So I think there's a lot of people who are quietly ghosting away. They just kind of don't show up, or people call them, hey, we've got a monthly meeting, and they're like, oh, I'm busy or whatever. They change their phone number, don't tell people. There's things like that going on. But so many people feel stuck, and they're like, I'd rather meet somebody on my own, but it would hurt my parents. So then they go through the arranged marriage system. They get an introduction. They might meet them for a few times, and then they get married. And then they're like, I really don't believe in this thing. But now it's like, shit, my in-laws, I'm going to piss them off if I leave. I can't. Then they have kids, and they're like, if I don't take them to Sunday school, people are going to gossip about my parents and my in-laws. So I got like a religious Sunday school for kids, right? That's very organized in most Muslim communities, including the Ahmadis at the mosque.
Do you guys have your thing at Sundays? You mean Fridays?
Yeah, because Sunday's off. My nieces and nephews go to it too. They go to Sunday school for Islamic studies.
We didn't have this problem because in Iran,
Ahmadis have the same Jummah.
Right.
Yeah, growing up in Iran, it's going to be different.
This is the problem with Western Muslims is that their day off is not on Friday; it's on Sunday instead, right?
Yeah. So it's a Western Muslim thing, not an Ahmadi. Most communities have like a Sunday school in the West, whatever religious community. So, kids would go there. So now they're starting to learn this stuff. So what ends up happening, it's kind of like, we're back to Blaise Pascal. You're kind of in this environment constantly. You can't really criticize it. If you step away, it's going to hurt you. So you're like, at some point, you're like, you know what? I got to pay the bills. I got to go to work. Who cares? And all your childhood friends, because Ahmadis are constantly having this event, that event. So your whole social network is Ahmadis from the start. So they make it socially very painful to leave, because by the time you hit the age of sort of reason and you think, wait, I don't want to belong, now you're like, oh shit, I've got a lifetime of friendships and relationships I'm going to have to throw away. So there's a sort of an emotional, social grooming and blackmail that forces you into this bubble. And then you don't want to hurt your parents, so then you get into a marriage. And then even if that person doesn't really believe, now you're going to hurt your in-laws, then your kids are in school, at Sunday school. And so this whole thing just feeds this network effect. And then you're stuck.
And that is the thing that applies to the Muslim community as a whole. I mean, this is a very common thing with ex-Muslims.
But it's more intense with Ahmadis
because
of the 3 degrees of separation.
And this is why the organization like the XMNA comes in to try to provide an alternative community.
Right. So I also tell, a lot of ex-Ahmadis or questioning Ahmadis in North America. I'm like, look, we have communities. I know you're going to be hurting. You're going to want that. And so, for people who are questioning, I always tell them, look, Muslimish, it's not available in other parts of the world, but if you're lucky enough in North America, that exists. And they accept questioning Muslims. If you're an ex-Muslim and you want to be just exclusively around ex-Muslims, there's XMNA. And of course, in other parts of the world, CEMB and ex-Muslims of Norway, and there's, New Zealand, and Australia's got a group or a couple of groups. So, these things are now all around. But I first found of XMNA in 2015, and I talk about this in my video. And by having that community, that gave me the strength and the impetus to say, I can speak up about this. And I realized that I had been living a closeted, inauthentic, restricted life. And then what happens is other people around you, an extended family, will say, see, that guy left Islam, even though he's quiet about it, he left Islam, and certain life milestones that happen for other people, he's left out. And it's like, are you serious? I'm actually trying to placate Muslims, sacrificing my own life, my own personal development, my own authenticity, and then now that's being used against me. So that's why I'm like, enough of this bullshit. And that's where in my video I say I call bullshit on this culture of intimidation.
Ooh,
Enough.
I like your aggressive side, Sohail.
Right? And so it's time that we speak up about this because it affects our lives, so many people's everyday lives. It's such a mind job done on you.
Right.
And it's enough of this bullshit. And so we have to come out, we have to speak out, we have communities. And one of the other reasons I started with my alias is because I remember there was an Ahmadi apologist who was challenging Mohammed Syed, president of EXMNA, to a debate. And that poor guy's got a full-time job, plus he does so much volunteering. He's just trying to run the organization. And I thought to myself, he doesn't know the Ahmadi apologetics. It's not fair to pit him against an Ahmadi who's going to have all kinds of apologetics he's not really versed with. It's my job as an ex-Muslim from the Ahmadiyya community to take on the Ahmadi apologists in a friendly, good-spirited way, but to dig into the issues. And so I thought I need to get involved. And at the same time, there was, the sort of the Sam Harris, Ben Affleck thing that had just happened. So there was multiple touch points, and I was like, I need to get involved. And so originally I was going to do it under my own name. And then I thought, you know what? As soon as I do, people are going to go, the Ahmadiyya community, or the Jamaat for short, is going to be like, hey, that guy, he is persona non grata. He's left. He forget him. Right. And so then anything else I say is going to get ignored. So that's why I thought the best way for me to do this is to do this under an alias. They can't attack me personally. They can't go after ad hom. They can't attack my family. They're going to have to focus on the issues. And then when I have enough material out there, I will take ownership of the alias. Right. And now they can't ignore me.
By the way, I've never seen this side of this more aggressive side of you. I like it because
I love that you.
Let me finish this because a lot of people don't know because we've been in touch with you for a long time. Again, I mention this every time. I'm so happy that you're out of the closet because every time you're in the live chat, you have reason on faith.
No more stress.
Yeah, I'm always stressing out over giving out your name. But you, the way you talk, the way you address these things is very friendly, very passive. So the few times that you actually call things bullshit and stuff, But another thing that people don't know that I just have to thank before we go to Patreon questions is that you are really good at organizing, documenting stuff, and a lot of behind the scenes, you're responsible for making a lot of projects that other people ran happen. So thank you for all of that, even though you never came at but I'm really glad that you're now open. I can't wait to see more of your content because now that you do it with your face on camera, it's going to get a lot more attention. So
and I want to say Sohail is also he is very concerned about how this image comes out because I think that you don't just want to make a point, you actually want to go out there and make a difference. And for that, I'll bring up this issue. You are very, your approach, a lot of ex-Muslims have very aggressive approaches, and you're used to all of that. Yeah. Huh?
You're talking about me?
Yeah, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
Right.
I mean, I have more of an aggressive approach.
Right. No.
But the thing is that you understand where those approaches are coming from. So I'm also going to say right now that in your city, you run the XMNA chapter, and you run the Muslim chapter. Yeah. Yeah, you co-run it. You're one of the guys who organizes all of that. So you're involved in XMNA at a leadership level. You're involved in Muslimish at a leadership level, and you're very, very committed to it. And one of the questions, patron questions, kind of ties into this is they want to know which ex-Muslims did Sohail mentor from behind the scenes, and we'll get into that as well. But I think this was one of the reasons that the original thumbnail that we had. So here's the thing: we had a thumbnail of.
That's me, by the way. Don't blame Sohail for that. That was all me.
Yeah. So the image that we had was, and I kind of liked it too. When I first saw it, is that you had the current Khalifa with an X on him, and then you had a picture of Sohail with a check mark, and you did not think that represented what you wanted to do.
Right.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you made that known, and I just wanted
I'm gonna change
say for the record that's something that
I'm gonna change that. Okay, that reflects more of my kind of aggressive way of presenting things. Yeah. So I
appreciate that, Armin. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing is that Sohail actually, when it comes to other people doing that kind of thing, he is very tolerant, accepting, and supportive of it. It's just that when it's your own message, you want to make sure that it hits the right notes, right, and represents you. So
I think a lot of people who take more my approach don't necessarily recognize that there are some people who've been through real pain with Muslim communities and theology that's a lot more vicious, and they have every right to be angry, and they have every right to stay sort of more aggressive, right? So there's different approaches, and they all have their time and place. They all have their context. They all have their reasons. And so, the only advice I ever give is when you are more aggressive, if you're good at communicating and you can communicate a bit of the context that goes with the target of that aggressiveness, then that can be helpful.
No, yeah. I mean, a lot of people think like aggressive means no nuance. That's obviously not the case. It could be aggressive. I mean, the kind of ideas I think we're fighting against, if it was packaged under anything other than religion, most people would be extremely aggressive against it. I think it's just a double standard when we talk about the same kind of teachings that is packaged under religion. When we go after it, people were like, "No, people like don't be nicer, don't be so hostile." But if the same people, same teachings under anything other than religion, everybody would call it bullshit. There would be no amount of tolerance for it, right?
Yeah, I
one thing
always
I
think
wanted
of
to say
like,
to that.
Wait,
Just really quickly,
Yeah.
that there's a difference between what we have a right to say, which I completely support, and what can be effective, and depending on which audience you have. And sometimes those things are different. So sometimes the criticism can be, hey, why are you saying that? And yes, we have the right to say it, but it might not even be the best thing for what we're trying to achieve.
Well, my experience has been the more hostile I've gotten, the more Muslims have come to me. One thing, like for
But
example,
have they come to you with an open mind?
Yes, because I have been trying to get Muslims to talk to me for example, for many, like on camera, off camera, and a lot of times it's very, very difficult to even start a conversation. But the one time that I got the most amount of Muslims wanting to talk to me was right after something I did that most people told me that if you do this, Armin, no Muslim would ever listen to you. You're gonna lose that audience, right? When I had the Allah is gay sign and I went out there, people told me, Armin, what are you trying to do? Like you're trying to convince Muslims to leave Islam, and you do stuff like this. They're not gonna listen to you. This is so insulting to them. It's not effective. But it's very interesting because I have right after I did that, I have never had this many Muslims come to me after that trying to have a conversation with me.
Yeah,
so it's exactly the opposite of what people tell you.
Yeah, I can actually vouch for that with Alishba too, because Alishba's got a very aggressive approach like Armin does, and she gets loads of the more she does it, there's more Muslim people want to come and talk to her. Mm-hmm. She has many more Muslims in her following and audience than even I do in mine. So
yeah, and I think Armin, you and I especially should probably have a more detailed conversation, because some of those things I will say, I have some disagreement in interpretation, and I think there's some things that we can unpack there. But that speaks to a wider thing that I did want to say, where generally I think there's some people in the community or sort of the movement who want everybody to either be passive or either everybody to be aggressive or have the same style. And I think we're going to have different styles.
Right.
But even though, like with a lot of people who are generally known to be aggressive, there might be certain things that they say, certain memes that they promote that I very much disagree with. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, my approach is to say I disagree with that thing or that technique or that approach of something, but I don't, I'm not going to negate the person. There's so many, for example, there's a lot of things in your approach, Armin, that are different than mine, and I would have a different sort of approach to. But I know that you're doing this from a place of wanting to help people, evaluate Islam, to be able to come out of Islam if they're questioning or if they're living miserable lives, or just to embrace the truth. And so I 100% support what you're trying to do, even though there'll be times where your memes or your approach or some of the rhetoric I may disagree with. And I think that's the right approach, where we can sort of a la carte disagree with things with each other without throwing each other under the bus.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's well said.
Yeah. There gets to a point where maybe, somebody is just overwhelming with stuff that you disagree with. And you're like, okay, well, generally speaking, I disagree with that person.
Right.
You know,
or their intentions is not even the right place.
Or if their intention is wrong, even if they're saying everything right, I'm going to be suspicious.
No, but I think.
Nope. Yep. But go on. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
That?
No, finish what you were saying.
So that is something, an ethos that I want to try to help in this movement, where we can agree, we can disagree agreeably, but we don't shy away from calling out where we disagree.
Right.
But that doesn't have to ruin friendships. That doesn't have to ruin the movement.
Right, and even if we have different styles, we could learn from each other.
Right.
Sure. And I think, if we have a 4-hour conversation to talk about some of these things, we'll probably get on the same page, or at minimum, you'll see where I'm coming from.
Yes.
And I'll see where you're coming from.
Okay, guys. So I'm going to move it along. I think, Armin, by the way, your point was is really good, that if anything else had all of these ideas, it reminded me of how, the people who are believing Catholics are like, well, aren't you going to stop listening to Michael Jackson now? Because of his child molestation charges and all that. And it's crazy, because if Nike or anybody else had thousands of child abuse victims and they tried to cover it up, that company would be shut down. But the Catholic
Michael Jackson is not a fair comparison, because I don't even know if
he was acquitted. He was acquitted, and we don't know.
They have way more proven cases against them.
Cases. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, patron questions. The first one from Robert Wheeler. I already said, which ex-Muslims did Sohail mentor from behind the scenes, if he can divulge that information, and have any of them been on the show before?
So. I think mentorship is a bit of a strong word. I think,
so humble.
I think I put stuff out there. Abdullah Samir's complimented me before as having influenced some of the things in his approach, or the way he might do stuff. But I don't see it as that way. I mean, I've been very involved right from the beginning with XMNA a lot in their online spaces. And so I think some ideas have just kind of percolated there generally. But I think, I wouldn't really characterize it as that. I think there's a lot of great leaders in the community who've just come into the forefront on their own.
I would say that you're one of them. And I think that one of the things that you do is you've physically gone out into the community. You go into these meetups, and I think there's a lot of young people who come in looking for the guidance, and then they see you, and then they talk to you. And especially with your approach and how, I guess, agreeable you are and how compassionate you are. And, along with the sexy voice, I'm pretty sure that has something to do with it. I think that
apparently I have a future in ASMR videos.
You do,
no,
but please
you're a very huge asset to the ex-Muslim community, even way before you even came out as public. So most people don't know that, because most of what you've done was been behind the scenes so far.
Great. Second question from Matt Hems. Why is abstaining from alcohol? You said that you still abstain from alcohol.
Yeah.
Why is that, or any indulgence for that matter, of value? Quote.
Well, so I think, and I talk a bit about this, I think, in my essay it's a treatise. It's called My Beliefs, a treatise, really briefly. But I'll give, I'm not, 100%, like everything a Muslim does, but something like alcohol, for example, there's sort of a momentum from just not drinking, At 19, when I started questioning, and I was at university, I was living away, I said to myself, other friends are drinking. And I would look at it, and maybe it was the Islamic apologetics, which I kind of agreed with, that, there are, people can get carried away with alcohol. It can be addictive for some people, things like that. I said to myself, if I don't have a craving for it, do I really need to take that chance? And in my own view, I look at it and say, in modern times, we've got airplanes, trains, cars, buses. We're more aware of things like alcohol's effect in domestic abuse, people making drunken mistakes that they regret, ruining relationships and things like that. And a lot of people can say, look, if you can handle alcohol, it's not a problem. But I'm like, look, if I don't know that until I'm sort of, once I know the taste, if I really want it, now I can't put the genie back in the bottle. So for me, it was a cost benefit, and said, you know what, if I don't really need it, then I'm just going to choose not to do it. And I've got to credit Islam for at least planting the idea that is an option, because sometimes in mainstream culture, it's not seen as an option for people.
Right. I mean, you're not missing much. I drink alcohol, and it's not that.
Yeah.
Not that
And most
good.
people are fine with it. I think I actually have a bit of an addictive personality. Sometimes when I'm stressed, I'm like, oh, I'll just have another cup of tea. That'll just, it'll perk me up a little bit. I'll keep going, right? I'm like, what if I really liked alcohol and that became a crutch? And I don't want to go there,
Yeah.
So that's the same with other drugs, I think psychedelics have some use, especially if people don't, not using them habitually. Just I'm not sort of in the recreationally doing it, but I've heard about people using things like ayahuasca for a life review, and if you got a proper setting and you've got people who are watching over you, and or in medical situations to help with trauma and things. So I think there's uses for that. But one of my big things is that even though I believe these religions are false, I think they're all man-made, and there's some wisdom in there.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, I think
accidental wisdom. Not
sure.
Right.
It's man-made. The things that sometimes work are man-made. So I say, you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of some of those ideas.
The baby
but
is
I
a
think
problem.
Yeah. So what I say is, but people want to reform, and I say, no, forget it. Just throw it out. Start with a clean canvas.
Yes. Okay.
And pick and choose the things on top of a clean canvas that actually resonated and made sense. Because religion doesn't own those good things, just like religion doesn't own community.
But when you're picking and choosing, you don't have to even go to the Quran to pick and choose. You could just.
I'm not going to the Quran. I'm just going to my,
Yeah, but I'm just saying, when you say religions sometimes have good messages and stuff, like, but why waste time looking for a needle?
They're not unique.
I'm not doing that approach.
Yeah.
I think he's saying that from his experience, it came from that. So, yeah, I should also mention that I actually didn't drink either until I was like 27 or 28. And even after that, even now, I'm not such a big drinker. So I agree with Armin. I don't think you're missing a whole lot.
Yeah, my dad actually made me drink vodka when I was 4, so I hate it. So I don't drink when I grow. Like, it worked actually. They did that with both cigarettes and vodka, and I hated both of them. And most of my, like in Iran, most of my classmates were drinking and smoking, and I hated it so much that I never touched any of that until much later.
I do touch on some of this in my video near the end, and I talk about, human beings, we do thrive on structure. We do sometimes need some guidelines for ourselves.
Yeah.
To live by, true to. But we need better ones. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'm going to go up for a couple of more questions because my kid's calling me now. So.
I promise all the patrons that we do all the questions.
I know we will. We're going to do it all. There's not a whole lot left. Okay. Ahmadiyyat sect. So this is from Laura Carson. She's saying, are you looked at the same if you leave the religion as others who leave more mainstream sects? Are you now an evil apostate, or are you now viewed as anyone who is never Islamic? And I think we covered some of this.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah. A lot of the blowback hasn't really hit me directly yet, but I know it's hitting my family. But most of it is like, why is he talking about this? Now, there'll be some apologists who are like, oh, brother, you should have studied and you clearly didn't read, or you're not being objective, or simple things like that. And I'm like, have you guys even looked at my website and looked at the material? Stop the ad hom and go attack my actual ideas and my arguments. Right. And there's people saying ludicrous things on Twitter. Even one guy who I've known since we were children, and he's lived in a different city for a long time. And I'm like, dude, it's so ludicrous. You want to attack me? Attack my ideas. I dare you. Go put an essay together,
right?
And refute an argument, and then let's showcase your essay against mine, and then let's look at which narrative just seems more cogent and believable. That's how we decide.
Yeah, I think, again, very well said. So, Veronica, this is more of a comment. She's saying, I thought I was having difficulties trying to get a UK passport, but apparently I'm having it so easy. So yeah, a lot of people are talking about the whole passport thing. And then finally, really the last question here is from Adam, and he's saying, is this live?
Yeah. Yes, I want to highlight one comment from Blonde Infidel. She actually mentioned that Ben Affleck has done a lot for ex-Muslims, which is actually true. A lot of ever since Ben Affleck came out on Bill Maher, a lot of ex-Muslims that were behind the scenes and in the closet just decided, like, okay, that's enough. I'm coming out and I'm going to fight this bullshit.
Yeah.
Because we thought, look, we need to speak up because it's getting so misrepresented. We're from these communities. We know these stories. We have to speak up. It's our moral duty.
Right. All right. So I think.
Okay, guys.
I'm
sorry. My wife's about to behead me, literally. There you go. If you guys heard that, anyway. So I think that's the end of the patron questions. Do we have any more? Or
No, that's about it. I think.
Okay, guys.
Ali is getting distracted, so let's end this right now.
Yeah. Okay,
Alright.
guys.
All right.
See you
Thank you,
tomorrow,
Sohail. Thank you.
We're still
Bye.
broadcasting. Okay. All right, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the patrons. Thank you to Adam, Veronica, Downing, Ahmadiyya, Robert Wheeler, Blonde Infidel, Matt, Mars, everybody, all you, John Camacho. Thank you, everybody, and we're going to see you next time. Thank you, Sohail. You're a rock star.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sohail.
guys.
All right.
All
It's
right.
my
Bye.
pleasure.
Okay.